I'll never forget the exact time the phone rang. It was 2:17 in the afternoon, a Thursday like any other, until it wasn't. My Uncle Greg's voice cracked on the other end, and that was all it took for my chest to tighten. "Nathan, it's your mom. She's had a heart attack. It's bad. You need to come to the hospital now." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt a wave of nausea rising, but I swallowed hard, trying to stay grounded. "Is she?" I couldn't even finish the sentence. "She's critical," Greg said, his voice trembling, "but she's asking for you." I stumbled into the living room, barely aware of the world around me. Lauren was there, sitting at the dining table, her laptop open and her phone pressed to her ear. Her posture screamed authority, back straight, head tilted slightly as she barked orders to someone on the other end. The image of her, so composed and detached, was jarring against the chaos erupting inside me. "Lauren," I called, my voice a mixture of urgency and desperation. She held up a finger without even glancing in my direction. I stood there, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, waiting for her to finish. When she finally ended the call, she sighed loudly, clearly annoyed. "What is it, Nathan? I'm about to jump on another meeting." "It's my mom," I said, my voice cracking. "She's had a heart attack. I need to get to the hospital." Her brows furrowed slightly, but instead of the concern I'd hoped for, there was only mild irritation. "Can't you take an Uber? I've got back-to-back calls all afternoon." An Uber? She wanted me to take an Uber while my mother lay in a hospital bed, possibly dying. I stared at her, waiting for her to realize how absurd her response was. But she simply opened her laptop and started typing, as if my crisis were nothing more than a minor inconvenience in her schedule. "Are you serious right now?" I said, my voice rising. She looked up, annoyed. "Nathan, what do you want me to do? Cancel my entire day? I have deadlines." Something snapped inside me. Maybe it had been building for years, the dismissiveness, the lack of empathy, the way she always seemed to put her career above everything else. But this moment, this was the breaking point. "I'll drive myself," I said, my voice cold. "Don't worry about me interrupting your day." I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, my mind racing with a cocktail of emotions: fear for my mom, anger at Lauren, and a growing sense of clarity. This wasn't just about today. This was about all the times I'd been made to feel small, unimportant. As I sped down the highway toward the hospital, I realized something. The woman I married no longer cared about me, if she ever truly had. This moment, the call, her response, was a wake-up call. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and something faintly metallic, like desperation. I arrived in a daze, my mind a whirlpool of worst-case scenarios. The nurse at the front desk directed me to my mom's room in the ICU. Each step down that sterile corridor felt heavier than the last. When I pushed open the door, there she was, my mom, Evelyn. The woman who raised me, taught me resilience, and always had a kind word, now looked fragile and diminished, surrounded by beeping monitors and 4 lines. Uncle Greg was sitting by her bedside, his hands clasped tightly. He gave me a sad nod as I approached. "Mom," I whispered, kneeling beside her. Her eyes fluttered open, and she gave me the faintest smile. "Nathan," she rasped. Even in her weakened state, her voice carried warmth. I took her hand, careful of the tubes. It felt so small in mine, like the years had stolen her strength. "I'm here, Mom. I'm right here." She studied my face with a clarity that startled me. "You've always been a good son," she said, her voice breaking. "But you're not happy, Nathan. I've seen it." Her words struck me like a hammer. "Mom, let's not talk about that now. You need to rest." She shook her head, as much as her frail body allowed. "Listen to me," she said, her tone insistent. "Life is too short to waste it on people who don't see your worth." I blinked back tears, unable to respond. She must have known. All those family gatherings where Lauren barely engaged, where I'd made excuses for her absence or indifference. Mom had seen through it all. "Promise me," she whispered, her grip tightening slightly. "Promise me you'll choose happiness, Nathan. You deserve it." "I promise," I choked out, though the words felt heavy in my throat. Her hand went limp a few moments later. The monitors let out a flat, unrelenting tone, and the nurse hurried in. Uncle Greg put his arm around me, but I barely noticed. My world had just shifted on its axis. I don't remember much of what happened next. Signing papers, talking to doctors, arranging for the funeral. I floated through it all, numb and detached. But one thing kept replaying in my mind. Her last words. That night, as I sat alone in my car in the hospital parking lot, I let the grief wash over me. But beneath the grief was something else. A spark of clarity. Lauren's face flashed in my mind. Not her smile or any tender moment, but the cold, indifferent look she'd given me earlier that day. It was a look I'd seen far too often, and I realized I couldn't keep living like this. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my decision was made. I would honor Mom's final wish. It was time to take control of my life. When I stepped into the house, it was eerily quiet, save for the faint clicking of Lauren's keyboard in her office. For a moment, I stood there, gripping the doorknob, trying to summon the energy to walk in and tell her what had happened. But the thought of facing her cold indifference made my chest tighten. Instead, I walked straight to the bedroom, shutting the door behind me. The bed was immaculate, as it always was. Lauren's insistence on perfection, even in the smallest things. I sat down on the edge and stared at the wall, the weight of the day pressing down on me. My mother's words echoed in my head, "Promise me you'll choose happiness." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, going over every moment of the past few years. The fights, the distance, the way Lauren always seemed to prioritize her career over us. She hadn't even checked on me after I left for the hospital. Not a single call, not even a text. Around 3 a.m., I got out of bed and sat at my desk. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated the darkroom as I typed a name into the search bar. Sophia Hart, attorney at law. Sophia had helped a coworker of mine through his divorce a couple of years back, and he couldn't stop singing her praises. I clicked on her website and sent a quick inquiry before shutting the laptop. The decision was made. The next morning, I sat across from Sophia in her downtown office. She was sharp, professional, and sympathetic without being overly emotional. "Nathan," she said after I explained everything, "it sounds like you've been carrying a lot of this on your own for a long time." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "Well," she continued, "the good news is, if Lauren has been as distant as you say, this could work in your favor. You've done most of the financial heavy lifting, correct?" "Correct," I said. Lauren's job paid well, but she had a knack for spending. Meanwhile, I'd been quietly saving, ensuring we had a financial cushion. "Then here's what we'll do," Sophia said, sliding a notepad toward me. "First, gather all your financial documents, bank statements, investment accounts, the works. Next, we'll draft the divorce papers, and I recommend you also take steps to secure your share of the assets before she can act." I hesitated. "You mean close the joint accounts?" Sophia nodded. "It's not about being cruel. It's about protecting yourself. Once she realizes what's happening, things could escalate." As I left her office, I felt a strange mix of emotions: guilt, anxiety, and, above all, relief. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a plan. That evening, I started going through our financial records. The more I dug, the more resentful I became. While I'd been meticulously budgeting and saving, Lauren had been treating our joint account like her personal piggy bank. Designer bags, luxury vacations, expensive dinners with clients. It was all there in black and white. By the end of the week, I had moved my share of the money into a separate account. I also gathered personal items that had sentimental value. My late father's watch, a few family photos, and some heirlooms my mom had passed down to me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was betraying her, even though I knew deep down that this was about survival. Lauren had always been the dominant one in our relationship, and for years, I'd let her control the narrative. But not anymore. When I met with Sophia again to review the divorce papers, she smiled approvingly. "You're doing the right thing, Nathan," she said. "This is the first step toward a new chapter." As I drove home, I rehearsed how I'd tell Lauren. But when I walked through the door, there she was, sitting at her desk, completely engrossed in her work. She didn't even notice me come in. I stood there for a moment, watching her. She looked the same as she always did, polished, composed, and utterly detached. The rift between us felt like a chasm now, impossible to bridge. I'll leave the papers on her desk, I decided, knowing that would be more fitting. She'd always been about efficiency and businesslike exchanges. Why should the end of our marriage be any different? I had spent the entire day pacing the house, going over my decision for what felt like the 100th time. The papers were neatly stacked in a folder on my desk, each page a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in our marriage. It was oddly poetic, in a way. Lauren loved structure, control, and things being presented in an orderly manner. These papers, with their clean, unflinching declarations of separation, were the epitome of that. Around midnight, I walked into her office. The room was immaculate, as always. Her desk was a reflection of her personality, everything aligned, not a pin out of place. I placed the divorce papers squarely in the center, ensuring they were impossible to miss. Beside them, I left a note, short, pointed, and honest. Lauren, I've taken my share of the savings, the heirlooms my mother left me, and the house. Don't worry, I've left everything well documented, because I know how much you value order. I can't live like this anymore, being a supporting character in your story. It's time I wrote my own. I stood there for a moment, taking in the life we had built, or rather, the life I had built and she had dominated. It was a hollow thing, built on convenience rather than love. With one last glance, I turned and left the room. Before heading out, I double-checked everything. The locks on the joint accounts had been set earlier that day. I'd already moved into my mother's house, and most of my personal belongings were there. All that was left now was to walk away. The drive to my mother's house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy and contemplative. As I pulled into the driveway, I couldn't help but think about the irony. This house, where I'd grown up, now felt more like home than the one I had shared with Lauren. By morning, Lauren would see the papers. I wondered how she would react. Would she be angry? Indifferent? Part of me hoped she would feel something, even if it was just the sting of loss. But the other part of me, the part that had spent years feeling invisible, knew better. The next morning, my phone buzzed incessantly. I ignored it, knowing exactly who it was. I had no interest in hearing her voice, no desire to listen to her inevitable tirade. Instead, I spent the day unpacking boxes at my mother's house, filling the empty space with memories of my own choosing. By midday, Lauren's messages shifted from anger to desperation. Nathan, I just saw the papers. Can we talk? Please. Another buzz. What do you mean you've taken the house? How could you do this to me? I sighed, putting the phone down. This was what Sophia had warned me about, Lauren trying to regain control. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I had drawn the line, and there was no going back. Later that evening, I received an email from her, a long-winded message filled with accusations, guilt-tripping, and a few thinly veiled threats about making me pay. I didn't respond. It wasn't worth the energy. Instead, I forwarded the email to Sophia. When I finally allowed myself to sit down and breathe, the enormity of what I'd done began to sink in. I had walked away from a life I had spent years building, but it wasn't my life. It was hers. For the first time in years, I felt free. As I sat there in the quiet of my mother's living room, surrounded by familiar things, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about leaving Lauren. It was about reclaiming myself. When I woke the next morning, there was an eerie calm. The sun filtered through the curtains of my childhood bedroom, and for the first time in years, I felt no urgency, no pressure to perform or cater to someone else's needs. It was just quiet, peaceful. That peace was short-lived. By mid-morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, voicemails, and texts from Lauren filled my notifications. I didn't need to read them to know what they said. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and I scrolled through a few. Nathan, you can't be serious. Come home so we can talk about this. What do you mean you've taken the house? Do you even realize how unfair this is? You're being childish. Let's handle this like adults. The messages alternated between anger, condescension, and desperation. The pattern was so familiar it was almost laughable. For years, Lauren had used this same tactic to control me, berate, belittle, and then guilt trip. But this time, it wouldn't work. By early afternoon, the tone shifted. The messages became less about reconciliation and more about panic. She must have finally checked the joint accounts. Nathan, how dare you lock me out of our money? I worked just as hard for that as you did. I don't know who you think you are, but this isn't over. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered standing in front of her the day before, desperate for her support while my mom lay dying, and being dismissed as an afterthought. That memory hardened my resolve. Back in the house we once shared, Lauren's carefully constructed world was unraveling. She had always prided herself on control over her career, her image, and, to some extent, me. Losing access to the accounts wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a crack in the foundation of her life. I imagined her pacing her pristine office, her perfectly styled hair slightly out of place for the first time in years. She'd probably called her assistant, barked orders to cancel meetings, and poured herself into damage control. But this was one situation she couldn't fix with a phone call or a power move. By evening, the messages stopped. I could picture her sitting in my house, staring at the divorce papers I'd left on her desk. I wondered how long it would take her to realize the truth. This wasn't just a temporary rebellion. This was final. The next day, I received an email from Sophia. Lauren had contacted her directly, demanding explanations and threatening to fight the terms of the divorce. Sophia, calm and composed as ever, assured me that everything was airtight. She's grasping at straws, Sophia told me over the phone. She knows she doesn't have much leverage, but that doesn't mean she won't try to make things difficult. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. This was the woman I had once loved, the woman I had vowed to spend my life with. But now, all I felt was relief. By the end of the week, rumors of the divorce had started spreading at Lauren's workplace. A mutual friend called me to say she had overheard colleagues whispering about it during lunch. Lauren's image had always been impeccable, ruthlessly efficient, endlessly composed. Now, cracks were beginning to show. I heard she was struggling to juggle her responsibilities, that she was snapping at subordinates and missing deadlines. It wasn't surprising. For years, I had been the one silently supporting her, filling in the gaps she didn't even realize existed. Without me, her perfectly balanced life was starting to tilt. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to revel in her downfall. But instead, I felt a strange sense of detachment. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. That evening, as I sat on the porch of my mother's house, I looked out at the fading sunlight and realized I was starting to feel something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The first few days at my mother's house felt strange, like stepping into a memory. Everything was so familiar. The creak of the stairs, the faint smell of lavender from the old curtains, the way the sunlight streamed into the living room just as it had when I was a kid. It was comforting and bittersweet all at once. I spent my mornings cleaning, unpacking, and organizing the space. The house had been empty for a while, and dust had settled into every corner. But as I worked, I felt a sense of purpose, however small. It was grounding, giving me something to focus on besides the chaos I had left behind. Uncle Greg stopped by on the third day. He brought over a casserole and a bottle of whiskey, his version of condolences. "Figured you could use some company," he said, setting the food down on the kitchen counter. "Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it." He leaned against the counter, studying me for a moment. "You holding up okay?" I nodded, though the answer wasn't as simple as that. "It's a lot, but I think I'm finally starting to figure things out." Greg gave me a knowing look. "About time, kid. Your mom worried about you, you know? She saw more than she let on." I swallowed hard, the mention of my mom hitting me like a punch to the gut. Yeah, she made that pretty clear. We sat in the living room, sipping whiskey and reminiscing about Mom. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Over the next few weeks, I started to rebuild my life in small but significant ways. I reconnected with Julie, an old friend from high school who now ran a small art studio in town. We met for coffee one afternoon, and it was like no time had passed. "You look lighter," she said, studying me over the rim of her cup. I raised an eyebrow. Lighter? Yeah, like you've let go of something heavy. I can't explain it, but it's a good look on you. Her words stayed with me. Maybe she was right. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to meet someone else's expectations. Julie invited me to one of her workshops, and before I knew it, I found myself spending hours in her studio, working with my hands again. I had always loved woodworking, a hobby I'd all but abandoned during my marriage. Lauren had dismissed it as a waste of time, and I had let her. But now, as I sanded a piece of cedar or measured the perfect angle for a joint, I felt something awaken in me. One evening, after finishing a small table I'd been working on, Julie walked over and inspected it. "This is amazing, Nathan. You've got a real talent." I shrugged, feeling a little embarrassed. "It's just a hobby." "No," she said firmly. "This is more than that. You could do something with this." Her words planted a seed. Back at my mother's house, I found myself going through her things one evening, sorting through old boxes in the attic. Among the photo albums and keepsakes, I found a stack of letters, correspondence between my parents from when they were dating. The love and respect they had for each other practically leaped off the pages. I couldn't help but compare their relationship to what I'd had with Lauren. Where my parents had been partners, Lauren and I had been something else entirely. The letters were a reminder of what love could be and what it should be. That night, I sat at the dining room table, sketching out plans for a small woodworking business. It felt audacious, almost reckless, but also thrilling. For the first time in years, I was doing something for me. By the time the divorce was finalized, I barely recognized the person I had been just a few months earlier. Lauren had tried to contest the settlement, but Sophia had been right. She had no leverage. Her demands for alimony were denied, and I was granted sole ownership of the house. When I signed the final papers, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. The chapter was officially over. As I packed the last of my mother's belongings into boxes and prepared to sell the house, I felt a pang of sadness. But it wasn't the kind of sadness that weighed you down. It was the kind that reminded you of what you'd lost and how far you'd come. I loaded the boxes into my car and took one last look at the house before driving away. The memories would always be there, but I was ready to move forward. It started with a call. "Nathan, please. Can we talk?" I stared at my phone, her name flashing on the screen. It had been weeks since I left the papers on her desk and walked out of her life. Weeks since I'd heard her voice. Part of me wanted to answer, to hear what she had to say. The other part, the smarter part, knew better. I silenced the call and slid my phone into my pocket, returning to the woodworking project in front of me. I had started crafting a set of shelves for Julie's studio, and the focus it required had become my therapy. With every cut, sand, and polish, I felt myself letting go of the anger, the hurt, and the memories of a life that no longer fit me. The calls didn't stop. When I didn't answer, they turned into texts, long, rambling messages alternating between apology and indignation. "Nathan, I'm sorry for everything. I know I've made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can rebuild. I can't believe you just left like that. After everything we've been through, you owe me a conversation." "Owe you?" I thought bitterly. I had spent years bending over backward to meet her expectations, sacrificing my own happiness for hers. I didn't owe her anything. One day, she sent a voice message. Her tone was softer, almost pleading. "Nathan, I know I haven't been the easiest person to live with, but I didn't realize how unhappy you were. I miss you. I miss us. Please, just call me back." I sat in my workshop, staring at the phone on the table. For a moment, I considered it. But then I remembered standing in that hospital room, holding my mother's hand as she told me to choose happiness. Lauren had shown me time and time again who she was. Calling her back wouldn't change that. A week later, she showed up at my mother's house unannounced. I was in the middle of sanding a table when I heard the knock at the door. Opening it, I found Lauren standing on the porch, dressed impeccably as always, but there was something different about her. Her usual air of confidence was replaced by an almost timid expression. "Nathan," she said softly, "can I come in?" I hesitated, but eventually stepped aside. She walked into the living room, her eyes scanning the space. "This is different," she said, gesturing to the modest furnishings. "It's not what I expected." I crossed my arms. "What do you want, Lauren?" She sighed, sitting down on the edge of the couch. "I want to talk. To explain." I stayed standing, watching her carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she began. "About the things I did wrong. I know I was selfish, and I know I didn't prioritize you the way I should have. But I want to make it right. I still love you, Nathan." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't have the impact she'd hoped for. I felt nothing. "You still love me?" I said, my voice calm. "Lauren, when I came to you that day, when my mom was dying, you couldn't even take 5 minutes to care. That wasn't an isolated moment. That was us. That was our life." She flinched but didn't argue. "I don't doubt that you're sorry," I continued. "But this isn't about regret or apologies. It's about who we are. And who we are together isn't good for me anymore." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Nathan, please. I can change. I've already started changing." I shook my head. "I'm glad, Lauren. Truly. But this isn't about you changing. It's about me choosing myself for once." She sat there, silent, as the weight of my words sank in. After a few moments, she stood and smoothed her skirt. I guess there's nothing left to say." I nodded. "I hope you find happiness, Lauren, but it won't be with me." She walked out of the house, her heels clicking against the wooden porch. I watched her leave, a strange mixture of relief and finality settling over me. That night, as I sat in my workshop, I realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. For years, I had carried the weight of resentment and disappointment. But now, that weight was gone. This was freedom, not just from Lauren, but from the version of myself that had allowed her to take over my life. For the first time, I felt truly at peace. The attic was stuffy and dim, filled with the scent of dust and time. I hadn't been up there in years, but something about that day, maybe the closure I felt after Lauren's visit, drew me to it. My mother had always been a sentimental person, keeping mementos from every phase of her life. As I dug through the neatly labeled boxes, I came across photo albums, birthday cards, and little trinkets that I vaguely remembered from my childhood. Each one felt like a small connection to her, a piece of the person I was still grieving. Then I found it, a box with my name written on the lid in her careful handwriting. Inside were items she had saved just for me. My baby shoes, some of my old report cards, and a stack of journals. The journals caught my attention immediately. They weren't mine, but hers, filled with her looping script and little doodles in the margins. I flipped through the first few pages, drawn in by her words. She had started writing them when I was a teenager, and they chronicled everything. Her thoughts about me, her worries, and even her observations about Lauren. It was the entries about Lauren that stopped me cold. "Nathan seems happy with her, but I worry she doesn't see him for who he truly is. He's so kind, so giving, and I fear she takes more than she gives. They've been married 2 years now, and I don't want to interfere, but I can't help noticing how tired he looks. He never complains, but I see it in his eyes. I hope he knows he doesn't have to sacrifice himself to make someone else happy." I don't think I've ever seen Lauren ask Nathan how he's doing. Not really. It's always about her. He deserves someone who looks at him the way he looks at her. Tears blurred my vision as I read her words. She had seen it all, the imbalance, the way I'd lost myself in the relationship. And yet, she had never pushed me to leave. She had always supported me, even when she didn't agree with my choices. The last entry was dated just a few weeks before her heart attack. "I hope Nathan finds happiness, truly. I hope he sees his worth and realizes he doesn't have to settle for less than he deserves. If I could tell him one thing, it would be this: you're enough, Nathan, just as you are." Her words hit me like a freight train. I sat there in the attic, clutching the journal to my chest, and let the tears come. That evening, I sat on the porch with Uncle Greg, watching the sun dip below the horizon. I told him about the journals, about the things Mom had written. "She was always wise, your mom," he said, sipping his whiskey. "She saw people for who they really were. And she loved you, Nathan, more than anything." "I just wish I'd listened sooner," I admitted. maybe things would have been different. Greg shook his head. Don't do that to yourself. You made the choices you made because you weren't ready to see the truth. But you see it now, and that's what matters. I nodded, taking in his words. He was right. Mom's journals weren't just a reminder of what I had lost. They were a validation of the path I was now on. The next day, I called Sophia. Let's move forward with finalizing everything, I said. You've already won most of the battles, she replied. This is just the finishing touch. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of finality. Lauren's attempts to reconcile, the bitterness and regret. It was all behind me now. What lay ahead was mine to define. That night, I opened my sketchbook and started designing a new project. It wasn't just a table or a shelf. It was a plan for a life I was finally building on my terms. The fallout from the divorce was inevitable, but I never anticipated how quickly Lauren's life would start to crumble. She had spent years crafting an image of perfection, flawless in her career, impeccably put together in social settings, always in control. But that image was starting to crack, and the cracks were spreading fast. I heard about it first through mutual acquaintances. Rumors were flying around Lauren's workplace, where the news of our divorce had become a hot topic. The whispers weren't kind. She's not handling it well, one former colleague of mine told me over coffee. She snapped at her assistant last week over something minor, and she's been missing deadlines left and right. I wasn't surprised. For years, I had been the silent force behind her carefully balanced life. I took care of the house, the finances, the mundane details she didn't want to bother with. Without me, it was no wonder she was struggling. Lauren's desperation to regain control manifested in one last-ditch effort to salvage what she could from the divorce. She contacted Sophia again, this time demanding alimony. She argued that I had benefited from her career, that I owed her compensation for supporting her ambitions. Sophia called me immediately. She's grasping at straws, Nathan, she said. With her income and the evidence we've gathered about her financial independence, she doesn't have a leg to stand on. She was right. Lauren's request was denied, and the divorce settlement remained as it was, fair and final. I imagined her reaction when she got the news. She wasn't used to losing, and she certainly wasn't used to being told no. For someone who had built her life around control, this must have felt like the ground falling out from beneath her. The turning point came when Lauren showed up at my mother's house again. It was late in the evening, and I had just finished cleaning up my workshop when I heard the knock. I opened the door to find her standing there, her hair slightly disheveled, a rare sight. Her makeup was smudged, and she looked tired, not just physically, but emotionally. Nathan, she said softly, please, can we talk? I didn't want to let her in, but something about the way she looked, defeated, almost broken, made me step aside. She sat on the couch, staring at her hands as if searching for the right words. I don't know how to do this, she admitted after a long pause. I don't know how to be alone. Her confession surprised me. For years, Lauren had projected an image of independence and self-sufficiency. To hear her admit vulnerability was almost jarring. I'm not trying to hurt you, Lauren, I said, sitting across from her. But this isn't something I can fix for you. You need to figure this out on your own. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, wiping at her face with the sleeve of her blouse. I never thought I'd lose you, she said quietly. I thought you'd always be there. That's the problem, I replied. You never thought about what it cost me to stay. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw true regret in her eyes. But it wasn't enough. Not to undo the years of neglect, the countless moments where she made me feel like I was invisible. I hope you figure things out, Lauren, I said as I stood. But I can't be part of that anymore. She left without another word, and as I watched her car disappear down the street, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for what we had lost, relief for what I had gained, and a deep sense of finality. Over the next few weeks, the rumors about Lauren grew louder. Her work suffered, and her reputation as a powerhouse executive began to fade. Clients started pulling out of contracts, and her colleagues whispered about her behind closed doors. Without me to quietly stabilize the chaos in her personal life, she struggled to maintain the image she had built so carefully. One day, I got a message from a mutual friend. Did you hear? Lauren's company is considering letting her go. They're saying she's too volatile. It didn't bring me joy to hear it. If anything, it felt sad. Lauren had built her life around ambition and success, but in the end, it had left her hollow and alone. Meanwhile, my own life was beginning to flourish. The woodworking business I had started was gaining traction, thanks to word-of-mouth recommendations and a little help from Julie. Each project felt like a step towards something meaningful, something I had created with my own two hands. As I stood in my workshop one evening, sanding the surface of a new table, I realized something profound. I didn't feel anger toward Lauren anymore. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. The difference was, I had finally chosen myself. The day the divorce was finalized felt like the closing of a heavy door, a soundless, profound end to a chapter of my life that had been weighed down by compromise and quiet despair. I didn't throw a party or mark the occasion with fanfare. Instead, I spent the evening in my workshop, the rhythmic sanding of wood grounding me in the reality of my new beginning. The house I'd grown up in was sold within weeks. The decision wasn't easy, but I knew it was necessary. Holding onto the house felt like holding onto the past, and I was ready to move forward. The proceeds gave me the financial freedom to do something I hadn't dared to dream of before. I invested in a space for my woodworking business. The first time I walked into the small, sunlit workshop I'd leased on the edge of town, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. The wide open space, the scent of fresh lumber, the hum of possibility. It was mine, all mine. I spent days setting it up, organizing tools, and sketching designs for the projects I wanted to create. Julie stopped by one afternoon, bringing coffee and her ever-encouraging presence. "This is incredible, Nathan," she said, running her hand over the surface of a table I just finished. "You've got something really special here." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. "Thanks, Julie. It feels good to finally be doing something that's mine." She nodded, her eyes meeting mine. "It suits you." Her words lingered long after she left, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to wonder about the possibility of love. Real, mutual, supportive love. But I wasn't in a rush. For now, I was content with the life I was building on my own. Lauren, on the other hand, wasn't faring as well. The last I'd heard, she had lost her job. The whispers about her erratic behavior and missed deadlines had finally caught up with her. It was strange to think of her struggling after years of watching her thrive, or at least pretending to. I occasionally wondered if she had learned anything from the experience. Had she reflected on the choices that had led her here? Or was she still clinging to the belief that she'd been wronged? I didn't know, and I didn't need to. Lauren's life was no longer my concern. One afternoon, while organizing some old sketches, I came across my mother's journals again. Her words, so full of wisdom and love, were like a guiding hand. "You're enough, Nathan, just as you are." I read those words over and over, letting them sink in. For years, I had defined myself by my role in someone else's life, first as Lauren's husband, then as the dutiful son. But now, I was discovering who I was outside of those roles. The woodworking business flourished in ways I hadn't expected. What started as a small side project grew into a full-time venture, with clients seeking me out for custom furniture and unique designs. I even started teaching workshops at Julie's studio, sharing my skills with others, and building a community that felt genuine and supportive. One evening, as I locked up the workshop, I stood outside and looked at the sign hanging above the door, Nathan's Craftworks. It wasn't flashy or elaborate, but it represented everything I had worked for, a life built on authenticity and self-worth. For the first time in years, I felt whole. The last time I thought of Lauren, it was in passing. I was walking through the town square, carrying a box of supplies, when I spotted her across the street. She was sitting on a bench, staring at her phone, looking as polished as ever but somehow smaller. She didn't see me, and I didn't approach her. There was no bitterness, no anger, no longing, just a quiet acknowledgement of the life we'd shared and the life we now lived apart. That night, I sat in my workshop, sketching a design for a rocking chair I'd promised to make for Julie's studio. The radio played softly in the background, and the smell of freshly cut wood filled the air. As I worked, I realized something profound. I was happy. Not in the fleeting, surface-level way I'd once tried to convince myself I was, but deeply, truly happy. For the first time, I wasn't living for someone else. I wasn't compromising or shrinking myself to fit into someone else's vision. I was living for me, and it was enough. I always trusted my instincts. They had never failed me before. A gut feeling, an uneasy twinge in my chest, a moment of hesitation. Those little signs had always been enough to steer me away from trouble. But tonight, as I sat at my sister-in-law's dinner table, staring at the overly elaborate salad in front of me, my instincts weren't just whispering. They were screaming. It was too perfect. The vibrant green leaves were arranged in an almost artistic pattern, the cherry tomatoes sliced with meticulous precision, the dressing drizzled in a way that looked more like a chef's masterpiece than something my wife, Clara, would typically prepare. I knew her cooking. It was fine, good even, but she wasn't the type to go out of her way to make anything fancy unless she had a reason. "It's a recipe I learned from a chef," Clara said, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. I looked up at her, my fork hovering over the plate. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The kind of smile you practice in the mirror to make it look natural. And yet, her fingers were wrapped just a little too tightly around her wine glass, the slight tremor in her hands betraying her forced calm. Something wasn't right. I glanced around the table. Megan, my sister-in-law, was happily chatting with her husband, Lucas, who sat directly across from me. He was laughing at something she had said, completely oblivious to the undercurrent of tension in the room. And then, the smell hit me. Not bad, just wrong. It was subtle. So subtle that anyone else might not have noticed it. But I did. Beneath the usual tang of vinaigrette and the earthy scent of the greens, there was something else. Something metallic, bitter, artificial. Clara was watching me closely now, waiting. I smiled, took my fork, and with practiced ease, I pretended to love it. A nod of approval, a murmured "this is great," and she visibly relaxed. It was all I needed. Lucas, still distracted in conversation, barely noticed when I slid my plate slightly to the side. My movements were precise, fluid, like a magician palming a card in plain sight. His plate, my plate, switched in an instant. He barely even looked as he grabbed his fork and dug in. I leaned back and waited. 25 minutes. That's all it would take. At first, I tried to push away the nagging thoughts in my head. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I had misjudged her, but deep down, I knew better. This wasn't the first time I had felt inexplicably sick after a meal prepared by Clara. It had been happening for months. Waves of nausea, dizziness, headaches that lingered for days. I had gone to doctors, had tests done. They found nothing. And then, strangely, the symptoms would vanish whenever I ate food that she hadn't made. Coincidence? Maybe. But I wasn't the kind of man who believed in coincidences. I didn't want to believe my wife was capable of something this sinister. But if there was one thing I had learned in life, it was this. When your instincts scream at you, listen. So I did. Lucas took another bite, still talking, still completely unaware of the situation unfolding right in front of him. I turned to look at Clara. She wasn't watching him. She was watching me. Her gaze flickered to my plate. No, to Lucas's plate, and then back to me. Realization dawned in her eyes, but she masked it quickly. Too quickly. Her lips curled slightly, the corner of her mouth twitching as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. I could see the questions forming in her mind. Had I eaten it? Was I feeling anything yet? Why wasn't I showing any signs? I held her gaze, let the silence stretch between us. Then, ever so slowly, I smirked. It was brief, a flicker of amusement, a private little moment just between us. Her grip tightened around her glass. Lucas, oblivious to the silent battle happening across the table, suddenly paused. He blinked a few times, shook his head slightly as if trying to clear it. Then, a small frown creased his forehead. "Ugh," he muttered, rubbing his temple. "I feel a little off." Megan turned to him, concern in her eyes. "Maybe you ate too fast." I kept my face neutral, my expression unreadable. But inside, I knew. This was it. I glanced at Clara again. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at me, her face pale, her breathing just a little too measured. And that was when I knew for certain. This wasn't paranoia. She had planned this. And now, she had poisoned the wrong man. The realization hit her like a freight train. I could see it in the way her chest rose and fell in rapid succession, in the way her fingers trembled as she tried to casually take a sip of her wine. I wasn't supposed to be sitting here, fully alert, completely unaffected. Lucas let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders as if trying to shake off a sudden wave of exhaustion. He frowned at his glass of water, then at his plate. "Weird," he murmured. "I just feel dizzy, I guess." Clara remained silent. I said nothing, because now, the game had truly begun. Lucas was halfway through his salad when I noticed the first sign. It wasn't dramatic, no gasps or clutching at his throat, no immediate collapse, just a pause, a hesitation. His fork hovered just above his plate, his eyes blinking rapidly, as if he was suddenly aware of something being off. I stayed perfectly still, my own fork resting idly against my plate. Across the table, Clara wasn't looking at him. She was watching me. That alone told me everything I needed to know. If she had been innocent, she would have rushed to his side the moment he muttered that he felt off. She would have been full of concern, asking what was wrong, fussing over him like any normal person would. But Clara wasn't normal. Instead, she was still as a statue, her wine glass perched between her fingers, lips slightly parted. 1,000 thoughts must have been racing through her mind at that moment, but her eyes kept flickering toward me, searching my expression for a reaction. I forced myself to act natural. The table was still alive with conversation. Megan, Lucas's wife, hadn't noticed anything yet. She was too busy telling some story about their weekend at the lake house, laughing at something her husband had said earlier. Lucas let out a slow exhale, rubbing his forehead. "Ugh, I feel a little off," he muttered. Megan finally turned to him, concern flickering in her eyes. "Maybe you ate too fast?" I watched as Lucas shifted in his chair, rolling his shoulders. He wasn't in immediate distress, but he wasn't comfortable either. A bead of sweat had begun to form at his temple. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. And Clara? She was gripping her own glass so tightly that her knuckles were turning white. That was when I knew. This wasn't paranoia. She had planned this. She had intended for this to happen. And now, she had poisoned the wrong man. The moment stretched on, suffocating in its weight. Megan was looking at Lucas now, her concern growing, but she hadn't yet connected the dots. "You okay?" she asked, reaching out to touch his arm. Lucas swallowed hard, shaking his head. "I don't know. I feel," he trailed off, exhaling slowly, his eyelids heavy. "Dizzy. My stomach feels weird." A low hum of unease rippled through the air. Megan was noticing now. I flicked my gaze back to Clara. She still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, and that was the biggest tell of all. A wife, an innocent wife, would be panicking. She would be fussing over her guest, offering him more water, asking if he needed to lie down. Clara did nothing. She was waiting for me to react, waiting to see if I had figured it out. And I had. I smiled, just the faintest twitch of my lips. Enough for her to see it, enough for her to understand. Her eyes widened, just slightly, before she masked it with a careful breath, forcing a smile of her own. But it wasn't real. It was trembling at the edges, threatening to shatter under the weight of what she had just done. Lucas groaned softly, shifting in his chair again. His hand gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles going as white as Clara's. Megan's voice was more urgent now. "Lucas, you don't look good." The conversation at the table had begun to die down. Other guests were starting to take notice. Lucas exhaled sharply. "I think I just need some air." I kept my voice light, casual. "Maybe you should lie down for a bit." He nodded slowly, but as he pushed himself up from his chair, his knees buckled, and he swayed dangerously. Megan shot up instantly, grabbing his arm. "Whoa, hey." I stood too, my movements much calmer. I wasn't surprised by this. I had been expecting it, counting down the minutes. Lucas gripped his head, blinking rapidly. I don't understand, he muttered. I just feel so. He trailed off again. Clara was still seated, still gripping her wine glass, still silent. I turned to her, and in the most even, casual voice I could muster, I said, "What exactly was in that salad, honey?" She flinched. A slight reaction, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. Megan looked up at me, confused. What? I stayed locked on Clara. The salad. You said it was from a new recipe. I tilted my head. What was in it? She was quick this time. Just normal ingredients, she said smoothly. Greens, nuts, a little dressing. Why are you asking? But she knew. She knew exactly why I was asking. Lucas groaned again, gripping his stomach. His face was beginning to pale. The sweat at his temple had grown worse. Megan turned to Clara, eyes narrowing slightly. Wait, why would you ask that? Clara gave a sharp laugh, too forced, too brittle. It's ridiculous, she snapped. He's probably just dehydrated or something. But Megan wasn't convinced, and neither was I. Lucas shifted again in his seat. His breathing was uneven now. His limbs looked too heavy. I turned back to Clara, lowering my voice just slightly. You sure about that? Clara's eyes darted around the table, looking for an escape. But there was none. The dinner party had taken a turn, and everyone was watching now. Then Lucas swayed again, and his legs gave out. He stumbled forward, knocking over his glass. The sharp clink of glass hitting the table echoed through the dining room, followed by a stunned silence. Megan gasped, reaching for him. Oh my God, Lucas. Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her breathing was quick, shallow. Lucas? Megan was shaking him now, panic rising in her voice. Lucas, what's wrong? But he was slipping. His head lolled slightly, his hands weakly gripping the table. And then I did it. Calmly, methodically, without hesitation. I pulled out my phone, and I pressed record. The red light blinked to life, capturing everything. And I said, clearly, firmly, let's get him to the hospital. Then I turned, locking eyes with Clara. And while we're there, maybe we should run a toxicology test on that salad. The room fell silent. Clara went rigid. I could see it in her face. The panic, the realization, the understanding that her plan had gone horribly, horribly wrong. I exhaled slowly. Game over, Clara. The moment I said those words, the room seemed to freeze. The air became thick with an uncomfortable silence, as if everyone suddenly felt the weight of something much bigger than a simple dinner party gone wrong. Megan clung to Lucas, her face etched with growing panic, while the other guests exchanged confused glances. But my attention never wavered. I was focused on one person, Clara. She was standing now, her chair abandoned, her grip still tight around her wine glass. Her knuckles were white, her lips slightly parted as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the right words. She was trying to think, trying to spin the situation into something manageable. But there was nothing to salvage here. Not this time. Lucas let out a low groan, his body leaning heavily against Megan's support. His forehead was slick with sweat, and his normally tan skin had taken on a pale, almost grayish hue. His breaths were shallow, uneven, and his hand trembled as he reached for the back of a chair to steady himself. Megan's concern had now fully transformed into alarm. Something's really wrong, she said, looking between Lucas and Clara. We need to get him help. Now. Clara inhaled sharply, her composure slipping just for a fraction of a second. Then, with practiced ease, she forced her expression into something resembling concern. I don't know what's happening, she said, stepping forward. Maybe he's just having a reaction to something? Maybe he's allergic to something in the salad? I narrowed my eyes at her. Is he? Megan shook her head. No, he eats everything. He's never had allergies. The carefully crafted excuse that Clara had been trying to build crumbled instantly. She licked her lips, shifting uncomfortably under my gaze. Maybe the greens were bad, she suggested, voice almost too light, too casual. Sometimes leafy vegetables can have bacteria. Cut the crap. I didn't raise my voice, but the words came out firm, cold. Clara's head snapped toward me, her breath catching. Megan blinked, startled. What? I leaned against the table, keeping my focus on my wife. You know exactly what's happening to him, don't you? Clara bristled. That's ridiculous. Is it? I asked. Because I think you were expecting someone else to be feeling like this right now. Her pupils dilated. A sharp inhale. I saw it. That brief flicker of fear. She knew. She knew I had figured it out. Megan's gaze darted between the two of us, confusion morphing into suspicion. What are you talking about? She demanded. Why are you looking at Clara like that? Clara forced a laugh. It was shaky. Because he's always jumping to conclusions, she said, shaking her head dismissively. He loves his little conspiracy theories. I took a slow step forward, closing the distance between us. Then prove me wrong. She blinked. What? I gestured toward Lucas, who was now slumped over slightly, Megan still supporting his weight. If you didn't do anything, then you should have no problem with a toxicology test. Silence. A heavy, unbearable silence. Then, finally, Clara's mask cracked. Just a little. Her breath came quicker now, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. You're being insane, she snapped. You're making a scene in front of everyone. That's not an answer. Megan's gaze shifted to Clara now, realization creeping into her features. Wait, her voice wavered. Wait a second. I could see it happening. The shift. Megan was beginning to connect the dots. Are you saying? Her voice faltered as she looked at me, then back at her husband, then at Clara. Are you saying that Clara did this? Lucas groaned softly. His breathing was slow, too slow. The tension in the room was unbearable now. Clara let out a sharp, frustrated breath. I can't believe this, she muttered. You're actually accusing me of something so outrageous. Then let's go to the hospital, I said smoothly. Let's have them test him. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize. Right here, in front of everyone. I let my words settle, let them sink deep into her mind, twisting around every fear she had. Her jaw tightened. Her nostrils flared slightly. She knew she was trapped. Megan was no longer just concerned. She was staring at Clara as if she didn't recognize her anymore. Clara, she said, voice shaking, tell me the truth. Clara scoffed. This is insane. Then come with us to the hospital, I repeated. Let's clear this up. For a split second, I saw it. Panic. Raw, unfiltered panic. She knew she couldn't refuse. Because if she did, it would confirm everything. Her mouth opened and closed, searching for the right words. Some way to escape. Some way to regain control. But there was no way out. And then, like a switch had been flipped, she changed tactics. Her body relaxed just slightly, her shoulders rolling back, her expression shifting into something more composed. You're really making a mistake, she murmured, her voice softer now. But fine. If it'll make you feel better, let's go. I smiled. Just a little. Checkmate. Megan wasted no time helping Lucas to his feet, though he was struggling to stay upright. Come on, baby, she whispered, panic thick in her tone. We're gonna get you help. One of the other guests, who had been awkwardly silent throughout the whole ordeal, finally spoke up. Do you need us to call an ambulance? No, Megan said quickly. We'll drive him. I stepped aside, letting her guide Lucas toward the front door. But as I followed, I turned my head slightly, just enough to see Clara watching me. Her face was carefully blank now, but her eyes told a different story. They weren't full of regret or guilt. They were full of something else. Hate. I exhaled slowly, letting the moment stretch between us. She thought this was over. She thought she still had a chance to fix this. She had no idea. Because this was only the beginning. The ride to the hospital was heavy with silence, thick and suffocating. Lucas sat slumped in the passenger seat of Megan's car, his head resting weakly against the window, his breaths uneven. Megan, her knuckles white against the steering wheel, kept glancing at him with rising panic, her lips pressed into a thin, worried line. Clara sat in the back seat beside me, unnervingly quiet. She wasn't crying. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't frantically trying to defend herself. She was simply staring straight ahead, unmoving, her hands folded in her lap. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the subtle twitch of her fingers, the way her nails dug into her palms just enough to turn the skin white. She was thinking, calculating. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. She knew. She knew she had made a mistake. She knew the switch at dinner had changed everything. And now, she was in damage control mode. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, but I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch between us, let the weight of it press down on her, suffocating her under the reality of what she had done. Megan, unaware of the war happening in the back seat, finally spoke, her voice strained. I don't understand. How could this happen? No one answered. Lucas groaned softly, shifting in his seat. Babe, my stomach. Megan tightened her grip on the wheel, swallowing hard. We're almost there, baby. Just hold on. I turned my gaze to Clara. She was still staring forward. Clara? She flinched. Just barely. But I caught it. Slowly, she turned her head toward me, her expression unreadable. What was in the salad? I asked, my voice calm. Her eyes darkened. You're still on that? I tilted my head slightly, studying her. You're awfully quiet for someone who's innocent. Her jaw tightened. I have nothing to say. I chuckled under my breath. That's a first. She turned away, her fingers curling into fists. You're being ridiculous, she muttered, but her voice was shaking. She was scared. Good. Because she should be. We pulled into the emergency entrance of the hospital, and Megan wasted no time jumping out, running to the other side to help Lucas. He was weaker now, his movements sluggish, his head lolling slightly as she helped him out of the car. A nurse rushed toward us, quickly assessing the situation. What's going on? He just suddenly started feeling sick, Megan said frantically. We were at dinner, and he just... Lucas groaned, gripping his stomach, and the nurse nodded quickly. All right, let's get him inside. As they helped him into a wheelchair and rushed him toward the entrance, I turned back to Clara. She was watching them go, her face carefully blank, too blank, and then she turned to me, and she smiled. Not a real smile. A challenge. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. You're unbelievable. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice so only I could hear. You think you've won something, don't you? I arched a brow. Haven't I? Her lips parted, but before she could respond, Megan called out from the entrance. Come on. I shot Clara one last look before heading inside. We stepped into the bright, sterile lights of the emergency room, the scent of antiseptic filling my nose. Lucas was being wheeled into a triage room, nurses surrounding him, asking him questions, checking his vitals. Megan stood nearby, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her face pale. I walked up beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. They'll figure it out. She swallowed hard, nodding. Yeah, I hope so. A doctor entered, glancing between all of us. I need to ask some questions, he said, looking directly at Megan. Has your husband eaten anything unusual tonight? Megan hesitated, then turned to Clara. Clara's face remained composed, her voice steady. We all ate the same thing, she said smoothly. I narrowed my eyes. Did we? She shot me a quick, warning glance. The doctor looked between us, his gaze sharp. What exactly did he eat? Megan licked her lips. We had salad. My sister made it. Clara smiled politely. It was a simple salad. The doctor nodded, writing something down. All right, we're going to run some tests. But based on his symptoms, we're looking at some kind of toxin or poison in his system. Megan's breath hitched. Poison? The doctor nodded. It could be foodborne, or it could be something else. We'll know more soon. Megan turned to Clara, but Clara was already shaking her head. You're not seriously thinking? Megan's voice trembled. Did you do something? Clara let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. Megan, come on. Megan took a step back. Clara, I swear to God. I didn't do anything, Clara snapped, her composure cracking just a little. The doctor sighed. Let's not jump to conclusions just yet. We'll let the tests speak for themselves. I folded my arms, watching Clara closely. I can't wait. She glared at me. Time passed. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Megan paced the floor. Clara sat stiffly in a chair, arms crossed, staring at the wall. I remained standing, watching her every move. Then the doctor returned, and the look on his face told me everything. We have results. Megan rushed forward. What is it? The doctor exhaled. There was a foreign substance in his system, something that should not be in food. Megan's face drained of color. I turned to Clara. She was frozen. But I saw the way her breath hitched, the way her fingers twitched just slightly against her knee. The doctor continued. It's a slow-acting toxin, not lethal in small doses, but it builds up over time. I inhaled sharply. So it wasn't a one-time thing. The doctor shook his head. No, this isn't something you accidentally ingest once. Megan turned to Clara, her voice breaking. Clara? Clara opened her mouth, closed it, and for the first time all night, she had no words. I leaned down beside her, my voice quiet. But you were right about one thing, I murmured. She turned to me, eyes flashing. What? I smiled. You all ate the same thing, but only Lucas got sick. Wonder why that is. And just like that, her face crumbled. Checkmate. The weight of the doctor's words settled over the room like a thick fog. Megan was frozen, her hands clutched tightly together as if she could physically hold herself upright against the truth that was unfolding before her. Lucas lay in the hospital bed, his breathing shallow but steady, his face still pale. And Clara was unraveling. She was still seated, her body rigid, but I could see the cracks forming. The way her fingers curled into the fabric of her dress, the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, struggling to maintain the mask she had worn so well for so long. I had seen Clara manipulate situations before, twisting reality to her advantage, but this was different. This wasn't something she could charm her way out of. The facts were piling up against her, brick by damning brick, and for the first time, she had no control over what happened next. Megan turned toward her, her voice barely a whisper. Clara, tell me the truth. Clara's breath hitched. Megan, she shook her head, forcing out a brittle laugh. You're not actually listening to this nonsense, are you? I stepped forward, my voice even. The test doesn't lie, Clara. She snapped her head toward me, eyes flashing with something between fury and panic. Oh, and I suppose you're loving this, aren't you? She spat, finally getting to paint me as the villain. I tilted my head, studying her. I didn't have to paint you as anything, Clara. You did that all by yourself. Her breathing was uneven now, her body tense like a predator backed into a corner. This is insane, she muttered. You know what? Fine. Let's pretend for a second that I actually did something. Megan recoiled as if she had been slapped. Pretend? Clara groaned, rubbing her temple. I'm just saying, if I had done anything, why would I have done it in front of so many people? That doesn't even make sense. I let out a slow breath. Because you weren't expecting Lucas to eat it. You were expecting me to. The silence that followed was suffocating. Megan gasped, stepping back as if she had just realized she was standing too close to something dangerous. Oh my God. Lucas shifted weakly on the hospital bed, letting out a low groan. Megan turned to him, brushing his damp forehead. Baby, I'm here, she whispered, her voice shaking. Then she turned back to Clara, tears welling in her eyes. You poisoned my husband? Clara bolted to her feet, her hands raised. I didn't. I cut her off, my tone sharp. Tell me, Clara, how long have you been doing it? She froze. Megan blinked. What do you mean? I didn't take my eyes off Clara. The doctor said the toxin builds up over time, which means this wasn't just a single attempt. It's been happening for months, hasn't it? Clara's breathing grew more ragged. She shook her head, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. That's ridiculous. I folded my arms. Is it? Megan's voice trembled. Clara, what is he talking about? Clara let out a sharp breath, her mask of calm slipping further. I don't know what's happening. Maybe the test is wrong. Maybe something else made Lucas sick? The doctor cleared his throat, stepping forward. The test isn't wrong, ma'am, and we've already ruled out foodborne illness. He turned to Megan. We'll need to run more tests to determine just how much of the toxin has built up in his system, but if he's been ingesting it for an extended period, there could be long-term effects. Megan let out a soft sob, covering her mouth. Oh my God. I turned back to Clara, my voice steady. Did you ever plan to stop? Her head snapped toward me, eyes burning with hatred. Stop what? She hissed. I took a slow step forward, lowering my voice. Poisoning me. Megan's breath caught. Clara's lips trembled, but she forced a smirk. You're delusional. I exhaled sharply. Then explain why I've been sick. Explain why every time I ate food you made, I felt dizzy, weak, nauseous. Explain why, when I started eating out more and avoiding your meals, the symptoms disappeared. Clara clenched her jaw, but she said nothing. Megan turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. You think she's been poisoning you this whole time? I nodded. Not enough to kill me. Just enough to keep me weak. Just enough to make me second-guess myself. Maybe even enough to get me out of the way permanently, just not in an obvious way. I looked at Clara. Am I wrong? Her nostrils flared. Screw you. Megan gasped. Oh my God. You really did it. Clara's mask shattered completely. You're so full of yourself, she spat at me. Always acting like you're so much smarter than everyone else. But you're not. You're pathetic. Megan stepped back. You tried to kill my husband. Clara's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in our entire marriage, she was speechless. And that's when I knew I had one. The doctor cleared his throat. I'll be informing the authorities. Clara's head snapped toward him. What? You don't understand. The doctor's expression was firm. Poisoning someone isn't just unethical, it's a crime. Megan turned back to Clara, tears streaming down her face. How could you do this? Clara let out a sharp breath, her hands shaking. I didn't mean to. But Megan was already shaking her head. No more lies. She took a deep breath, turning away. I need to be with my husband. Clara took a step forward. Megan didn't even look at her. And just like that, Clara had lost her last ally. The weight of it hit her all at once. I saw it happen. The realization, the fear, the understanding that no one would be on her side after this. She turned toward me instead, her face twisted with fury. This isn't over, she whispered. I smiled. Just a little. Oh, Clara, I murmured. It's already over. The doors swung open behind her, and the police walked in. For the first time that night, I saw true fear in her eyes. Clara's body stiffened the moment the officers stepped into the room. For a split second, she didn't move, didn't breathe. It was as if her mind had short-circuited, trying to process what was happening. She had spent the entire evening controlling the narrative, spinning her lies with the precision of a practiced manipulator. But now, standing in front of two uniformed officers, she had lost all control. Her eyes darted to me first. Pure hatred burned in them, a silent promise that if she went down, she'd do everything she could to drag me down with her. Then she turned to Megan, her sister, her last hope, only to find Megan standing protectively beside Lucas, arms folded tightly around herself, her face drawn with grief and betrayal. Megan wouldn't save her. No one would. The older of the two officers, a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair, stepped forward and cleared his throat. We received a report from the hospital staff, he said, his voice firm but calm. His gaze shifted to Clara. Are you Clara? Clara's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say no, as if she could somehow rewrite reality one last time. But then she snapped her mouth shut, swallowing hard. Yes, she finally muttered. The second officer, a younger man with sharp eyes, took a notepad from his pocket. We need to ask you a few questions, he said. It would be best if you answered truthfully. Clara's breathing was uneven now, her fingers clenching at the fabric of her dress. This is a mistake, she said quickly. I didn't do anything. Megan let out a soft, bitter laugh. You really can't stop lying, can you? Clara snapped her head toward her sister, her expression a mixture of desperation and anger. Megan, you know me. You know I would never. I thought I knew you, Megan interrupted, her voice raw, but I don't, because the sister I knew wouldn't have poisoned my husband. Lucas, still weak in his hospital bed, let out a quiet groan. Megan immediately turned back to him, brushing a damp strand of hair from his forehead. I'm right here, baby, she whispered. That moment, the tenderness, the love, the absolute devastation, was the final nail in Clara's coffin. The officers exchanged a glance before the older one spoke again. The toxicology results indicate that your brother-in-law ingested a foreign substance that should not have been in his food. Given the circumstances, we have reason to believe this was intentional. Clara's chest rose and fell rapidly. You have no proof? I took a slow step forward, reaching into my pocket. Actually, I murmured, pulling out my phone. We do? I tapped the screen, playing back the recording from earlier. Clara's voice filled the room. The sharp defensiveness, the excuses, the exact moment her composure cracked. But the most damning part? The way she flinched when I suggested a toxicology test. I turned the volume up. The recording played the moment I had asked, "What exactly was in that salad, honey?" And Clara's silence, her hesitation, her flinch. The officers listened carefully. The older one nodded slowly. That's interesting, he said, jotting something down. Then he turned back to Clara. Would you like to explain why you reacted that way? Clara's face was pale now. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You're seriously basing this on a flinch? No, the officer replied. We're basing this on the test results, on the victim's symptoms, and on the fact that all evidence points to one person, you. Clara took a step back, her breath coming in short gasps. No, she muttered, shaking her head. You don't understand. The younger officer flipped to a new page in his notepad. Then help us understand. Tell us why your husband has been experiencing unexplained illnesses for months. Clara's entire body went rigid. Silence. Then, slowly, she turned to face me. The hatred in her eyes was suffocating. You did this, she whispered, her voice trembling. You turned everyone against me. I chuckled, shaking my head. No, Clara, you did that all by yourself. Her breathing grew erratic, her hands shaking violently at her sides. You have no idea what you've done. The older officer sighed. All right, Mrs. Clara, we're placing you under arrest for attempted poisoning and aggravated assault. Megan gasped. Lucas, barely conscious, let out a weak groan. Clara, however, let out a short, hysterical laugh. Are you serious? She looked around the room as if waiting for someone to object, but no one did. The older officer stepped forward, reaching for his cuffs. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back. For a moment, I thought she was going to run. Her eyes darted toward the door. Her body tensed as if preparing to make a break for it. But then she must have realized how hopeless it was. She was cornered, trapped in a hospital room with no escape. Slowly, reluctantly, she turned around. The click of the cuffs locking around her wrists echoed in the silent room. Her shoulders trembled. Her carefully constructed world had just collapsed around her. The officers led her toward the door, but just before she stepped out, she turned her head slightly, her gaze locking onto mine one last time. And then she said it. A whisper, just for me. This isn't over. A chill ran down my spine. I stared at her, unblinking. Oh, Clara, I murmured. It's already over. She clenched her jaw, but she didn't fight back. The officers pulled her through the doorway, and just like that, she was gone. Megan let out a shaky breath, collapsing into the chair beside Lucas's bed. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I walked over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She can't hurt him anymore, I said softly. Megan sniffled, lifting her head. I don't understand, she whispered. How could she do this? I sighed. Because she thought she could get away with it. Lucas stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. Meg, he croaked. Megan immediately leaned over him, brushing his hair back. I'm right here, baby. You're safe. He swallowed thickly, his gaze flickering toward me. What happened? I exhaled. Justice happened. Lucas blinked, his eyes unfocused but slowly coming to terms with the reality around him. Megan kissed his forehead, murmuring soft reassurances, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself relax. Clara was gone. The nightmare was over. And as I stood in that hospital room, watching Megan hold Lucas's hand, I realized something. I had been walking through life with a blindfold on, trusting someone who had never truly been on my side. But now, I was finally free. The silence after Clara was taken away was heavy. Megan sat at Lucas's bedside, her hands gripping his weak fingers as if they were the only thing tethering her to reality. Lucas's eyes were half-lidded, exhausted from the ordeal, but he was stable now. The doctors had confirmed that the worst was over, that the toxin had been purged from his system before permanent damage could be done. Still, the emotional wounds were fresh. I stood near the door, watching as Megan wiped away the silent tears streaking down her cheeks. The room smelled sterile, the beep of the machines rhythmic and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just moments ago. Megan exhaled shakily and turned to me. She really did it. I nodded, my expression unreadable. Yeah, she did. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. You know, for years, I always told myself Clara was just difficult, that she was controlling because she cared, that she was stubborn because she wanted the best for everyone. But this? Her voice wavered. This is pure evil. I exhaled, stepping closer. She knew exactly what she was doing. Megan squeezed Lucas's hand a little tighter. Do you really think she was doing this to you too? I let out a low chuckle, though there was no humor in it. I don't think, Megan. I know. Her lips pressed together, her expression darkening. Oh my God. I shrugged. It was never enough to kill me outright, but looking back, I see the pattern. The unexplained sickness, the fatigue, the headaches. She was careful, controlled, just enough to keep me weak, just enough to make me doubt myself. And if tonight hadn't happened, if Lucas hadn't eaten my plate, I let my words hang in the air. Megan's eyes filled with horror. She would have kept going. I nodded, until I was no longer a problem. She shook her head, disbelief and fury battling for dominance in her features. How did I never see it? I sighed. Because we don't expect the people we love to be capable of something like this. Her expression twisted in pain. She's my sister. I know. She tried to kill my husband. I know. Megan swallowed hard. And she almost got away with it. That was the part that hit the hardest. The realization that if I had ignored my instincts, if I had taken even one more bite of that salad, things might have gone very differently tonight. Clara had spent months crafting the perfect illusion, building trust, planting seeds of doubt, manipulating every situation to her advantage. And she had done it with such precision that, up until the last moment, no one had suspected a thing. But now, the illusion had shattered. Lucas stirred beside Megan, his voice hoarse. Babe. She immediately turned her attention back to him, brushing her fingers through his damp hair. I'm here, love. He blinked, his gaze unfocused. What happened? Megan hesitated, her throat bobbing as she tried to find the right words. Finally, she exhaled and whispered, Clara poisoned you. Lucas frowned, his brows knitting together as if his brain couldn't quite process the information. Clara? Megan nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. She put something in your food. It was meant for someone else, but you ended up eating it. Lucas was silent for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he turned his head toward me. Meant for you? I nodded. Yeah. His breathing grew heavier as the realization sank in. Jesus. Megan smoothed a hand over his arm. It's over now, she whispered. She's gone. Lucas let out a slow, unsteady breath. She really did that? I leaned against the wall, my arms crossed. Yeah, and she's been doing it for a while. Lucas shut his eyes, exhaling sharply. I always knew she was cold, but this? He shook his head weakly. I can't believe it. Megan wiped at her eyes, sniffing. Neither can I. The room fell into another stretch of silence. I let them sit in it, let them process what had happened, let them grieve the loss of the woman they thought they knew. Finally, Megan turned to me. What happens now? I sighed. She'll be charged. With the toxicology results, the recording, and the hospital report, there's enough evidence to convict her. Megan swallowed. How long will she get? I shrugged. It depends. But with attempted poisoning and premeditation, a long time. Megan let out a shaky breath, rubbing her face. God. Lucas shifted slightly, wincing. Does she even feel bad about it? I met his gaze, my voice calm. No. Megan's expression twisted. She wasn't even sorry. No, I agreed. She was angry, not because she got caught, but because she failed. A visible shudder ran through Megan's body. She was willing to let you die, she whispered. She was willing to let Lucas die. I nodded, because in her mind, we were obstacles, problems to be dealt with, nothing more. Lucas exhaled, staring at the ceiling. She really was a monster. Megan let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, and I defended her for years. Guilt weighed heavy in her voice. I stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. You didn't know? She shook her head. But I should have. I didn't argue. I knew Megan needed to process this on her own. She had spent her whole life seeing Clara as her older sister, her protector, the woman who always seemed to have everything together. But now, she had to face the ugly truth. Clara wasn't who she thought she was. And maybe, she never had been. Lucas groaned softly, shifting again. Babe? Megan turned her full attention back to him, running a soothing hand over his forehead. I'm here, love. I'm here. I took that as my cue to step back, giving them their space. I had done what I came to do. Clara was gone. Lucas was safe. And me? For the first time in a long time, I was free. I let out a slow breath, glancing toward the hospital doors. Outside, the world kept moving. People laughed, talked, lived, and I had almost lost my chance to be part of it. I had spent months feeling weak, questioning myself, blaming everything but the one person who had been orchestrating my downfall. But now, I knew better. I straightened my shoulders and took a slow step toward the door. For the first time in years, I was walking away from Clara, and I wasn't looking back. The days that followed felt surreal, like I had woken up in someone else's life. There was no more walking on eggshells in my own home, no more questioning my health, no more second-guessing my instincts. The weight I had been carrying for months, maybe even years, was gone. Clara was gone. And yet, I found myself standing in my kitchen, staring at the empty space where she used to stand while cooking, the air heavy with an eerie stillness. I should have felt relieved. I should have been celebrating my freedom, my survival. Instead, there was a strange, hollow sensation in my chest, not sadness exactly, but the unsettling realization of just how close I had come to losing everything. I ran a hand over my face, exhaling slowly. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. Everything was the same, yet completely different. The police had come by the house the day after Clara's arrest. They searched through our belongings, bagging evidence, taking samples. They found a bottle hidden deep in the pantry, something unmarked, something lethal in the wrong doses, something meant for me. The detective, a no-nonsense man with tired eyes, had given me a long look as he held up the evidence bag. She was patient, he had said, careful. And that was what haunted me the most. How long had Clara been planning this? How many times had she stood in this kitchen, mixing up her carefully measured doses, watching me take bite after bite with that same practiced smile? I shook the thought away, pushing myself off the counter. Dwelling on it wouldn't change anything. She was in jail now, awaiting trial. The charges were serious: attempted murder, aggravated assault, premeditated poisoning. With the evidence stacked against her, it was unlikely she'd see the outside of a prison for decades. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was exhausted. The sound of my phone vibrating on the counter broke me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. Megan. I hesitated for a second before answering. Hey, she said, her voice softer than usual. I just wanted to check in. How are you doing? I let out a short laugh. Honestly? No idea. Megan sighed. Yeah, me neither. I could hear the weight in her tone, the same exhaustion I felt. This wasn't just my nightmare. It was hers too. She had lost a sister, but not in the way people usually do. Clara wasn't gone because of some tragic accident. She had destroyed herself. And now, Megan had to live with the knowledge that she had once trusted someone who was capable of something so monstrous. How's Lucas? I asked. He's recovering, she said, a slight tremor in her voice. Physically, he's doing a lot better. But mentally? She paused. I think it's going to take time. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yeah, that makes sense. There was a long pause between us. Then Megan exhaled. I can't believe I defended her for so long. You didn't know. I should have, she muttered. I should have seen the signs. I should have questioned things more. She stopped herself, then took a shaky breath. I keep thinking about all the times I made excuses for her. All the times she made you feel like you were the problem. And I let her. I closed my eyes. You're not responsible for what she did, Megan. Maybe not, she admitted. But I feel like I let her get away with too much for too long. I didn't know what to say to that. Because, deep down, I understood. I had done the same thing. I had ignored the warning signs, rationalized the small betrayals, convinced myself that I was just being paranoid. And it almost cost me my life. Megan cleared her throat. I've been talking to a therapist about it. About Clara. About everything. I raised a brow. That's probably a good idea. She hesitated. You should think about it too. I let out a short laugh. Megan, I think therapy might break me at this point. She didn't laugh. I'm serious. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. I'll think about it. She hummed softly, clearly not convinced but willing to let it go for now. Another pause. Then she spoke again, quieter this time. Do you think she ever really loved you? The question hit me harder than I expected. I ran a hand through my hair, my chest tightening. I don't know. And that was the truth. Maybe, in her own twisted way, Clara had once loved me. Maybe she had started off with good intentions, believing she was doing what was best for us. Maybe she had convinced herself that her actions were justified, that making me weaker, more dependent on her, was some kind of necessary evil. Or maybe she had never loved me at all. Maybe I had been nothing more than a tool to her, a means to an end. I swallowed hard, my voice quieter. But I know she didn't respect me. Megan exhaled softly. Yeah. And in the end, maybe that was worse. Because love without respect wasn't really love at all. After a few more minutes of small talk, Megan finally let me go, promising to check in later. I set my phone down and stared at the empty house around me. It was mine now. Completely, truly mine. I should have felt free. But instead, all I felt was the ghost of what had almost been. I turned toward the window, watching as the world outside moved on, oblivious to the storm that had just passed through my life. Clara was gone. Lucas was safe. Megan was healing. And me? I had survived. But surviving wasn't the same as living. I had spent so long under Clara's control that I wasn't sure who I was without her. What did I even want now? Where did I go from here? I didn't have the answers. But for the first time in a long time, I was free to find them. And maybe that was enough. It had been 2 weeks since Clara's arrest, and yet, her presence still lingered like a ghost in every corner of the house. I had scrubbed the kitchen, replaced the linens, even rearranged some of the furniture, but no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching me. Or maybe it wasn't her. Maybe it was just the paranoia she had planted inside me over the years, refusing to let go. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, staring at the neatly made bed. It was strange sleeping alone now. The first few nights, I hardly got any rest, my body still conditioned to the weight of someone lying beside me. But the absence of Clara was different from a simple breakup. She wasn't just gone. She had been removed. And the knowledge of what she had done, what she had planned for me, made the silence of the house feel like both a blessing and a curse. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, moving to the closet. I had put this off long enough. If I wanted to start over, truly start over, then I needed to get rid of everything that reminded me of her. I pulled open the closet doors, my eyes scanning over her neatly arranged clothes. Dresses, blouses, shoes lined up in perfect order. Clara had always been meticulous about her appearance, about maintaining control over every aspect of our home. Even now, after everything, it looked untouched, as if she could walk through the front door at any moment and scold me for messing with her organization. But she wasn't coming back. I reached for the first set of hangers and started pulling them down, tossing them into a pile. One by one, I emptied the shelves, stripping away every piece of her from this house. Some part of me expected it to feel cathartic, liberating. But instead, with every dress that fell to the floor, I felt something else. Anger. This wasn't just clothing. These were the things she had worn while standing in the kitchen, smiling sweetly as she served me poisoned meals. The dresses she had worn to dinner parties, laughing at my jokes while slowly weakening my body. The heels she had worn while walking past me with that practiced, innocent expression, knowing I was too blind to see the truth. I clenched my jaw, gripping a particularly expensive-looking dress and hurling it across the room. It hit the far wall and crumpled into a heap, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase her. The anger burned hotter. She had stolen so much from me. My health, my peace of mind, my ability to trust. She had manipulated me, made me doubt my own body, my own instincts. And for what? Power? Control? I had spent so much time wondering why she did it, trying to piece together the motive behind something so cruel. But standing here now, surrounded by the remnants of the woman who had tried to kill me, I realized something. It didn't matter why. It would never make sense to me, because I wasn't like her. I wasn't capable of that kind of betrayal, that level of cold calculation. I could spend the rest of my life searching for answers, but it wouldn't change the fact that she had made a choice. And now, so had I. I grabbed a garbage bag and started shoving her clothes inside. My movements quick and efficient. The sooner this was done, the better. I wasn't going to let her haunt me any longer. An hour later, the closet was empty, the bags tied up and waiting by the door. I would donate them. I didn't care who took them, as long as they were out of my house. I wiped my hands on my jeans and took a step back, surveying the now bare space. It was mine again, completely mine, and yet, I still didn't feel free. I turned away, running a hand through my hair. I needed air. Stepping out onto the porch, I inhaled deeply, letting the crisp evening breeze fill my lungs. The sky was fading into hues of orange and purple, the world outside moving forward as if nothing had happened. People walked by, cars drove down the street, laughter echoed from a nearby house. Life went on. I pulled out my phone and hesitated before dialing. After a few rings, Megan answered. "Hey," she said, her voice softer now, more exhausted than before. "Hey," I murmured. "How's Lucas?" She let out a slow breath. "Better. The doctors say he should make a full recovery, but it'll take time." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "That's good." A pause. "And you?" she asked carefully. I glanced back at the house, my jaw tightening. "I don't know." Megan didn't rush to fill the silence. She waited, giving me the space to figure out what I wanted to say. "I got rid of her stuff," I finally admitted. There was a brief pause before she responded. "How did it feel?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. Like ripping out weeds only to realize the roots are still there. She sighed. "Yeah, I get that." Another pause. Then Megan spoke again, her voice hesitant. I went to see her." I froze. "What?" "At the jail," she clarified. "I needed to see her. I needed answers." My grip tightened on the phone. "And?" Megan swallowed audibly. She wasn't sorry. I closed my eyes. Of course she wasn't. She just kept talking in circles, Megan continued. "Blaming you, blaming me, blaming Lucas." She acted like she was the victim. I exhaled slowly. "That sounds about right. I think she really believes she did nothing wrong. She's a textbook narcissist," I said, rubbing a hand over my face. "She never cared about anyone but herself." Megan hesitated. I told her I never wanted to see her again. Good, I said firmly. You don't owe her anything. Another beat of silence stretched between us before Megan spoke again, quieter this time. Are you going to the trial? I stared out at the street, my thoughts heavy. I don't know, I admitted. You don't have to, she said quickly. You don't owe her that. I know, I said, but maybe I owe it to myself. Megan didn't argue. If you do, I'll be there. I nodded. Thanks, Megan. She sighed. We'll get through this. Yeah, I murmured. We will. I hung up and slipped my phone back into my pocket, staring up at the darkening sky. Clara had tried to break me. She had failed. And now, for the first time in a long time, my future was mine again. The day of Clara's trial arrived faster than I expected. I had spent the past few weeks trying to rebuild my life, reclaiming my house, my routine, my sense of normalcy. But no matter how much I tried to move forward, there was always a shadow lingering behind me, a weight pressing against my chest, reminding me that unfinished business still loomed ahead. And today, that business was finally coming to a close. I arrived at the courthouse early, stepping out of my car into the crisp morning air. The sky was a dull gray, the kind of overcast that threatened rain but never quite delivered. A fitting backdrop for the final chapter of this nightmare. As I walked up the courthouse steps, I spotted Megan standing off to the side, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked nervous, but when she saw me, she forced a small, tired smile. You made it, she murmured. I nodded. Yeah. She searched my face for a moment before exhaling. I wasn't sure if you'd come. I let out a dry chuckle. Neither was I. Megan nodded, rubbing her arms as if to ward off the cold. Lucas wanted to be here, but he's still recovering. I frowned. How's he doing? Better, she said. Physically, at least. But mentally? She shook her head. I don't know. Some nights he still wakes up in a panic, convinced he's going to start feeling sick again. I clenched my jaw. Clara did more damage than just the poisoning. Megan sighed. Yeah. A long pause stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. Then she glanced toward the courthouse doors. Are you ready for this? I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was, I didn't know if I was. But ready or not, I was here. And I needed to see this through. We made our way inside, the sterile white hallways leading us toward the courtroom. The atmosphere was tense, hushed conversations, and the occasional shuffle of papers filling the space. As we entered, I spotted the prosecution setting up their documents, while a few reporters lingered in the back, waiting for the trial to begin. And then I saw her, Clara. She was sitting at the defense table, wearing a beige prison uniform, her hands cuffed in front of her. For a moment, our eyes met. And just like that, the months of distance, the weeks of separation, the barriers of jail bars and legal proceedings melted away. I saw her, the woman I had once loved, the woman who had smiled at me across dinner tables, held my hand in crowded rooms, whispered promises into my ear late at night. But that woman was gone. Maybe she had never existed at all. Clara's gaze flickered with something unreadable before she turned away, her posture stiff, her face blank. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. This was it. The trial began with the prosecution laying out the facts. They detailed how the toxicology report confirmed the presence of poison in Lucas's system, how the investigation uncovered traces of the same substance hidden in my own home. They played my recording, the moment I confronted Clara at dinner, the hesitation in her voice, the way she flinched at my accusation. Then they introduced the doctors who had treated Lucas, explaining how the poisoning had been slow and calculated, meant to weaken rather than kill instantly. The evidence was overwhelming. And yet, Clara didn't react. She sat motionless, her face unreadable, as if she were simply an observer in someone else's story. Then came Megan's testimony. She stood at the witness stand, hands trembling slightly, and recounted everything. Lucas's sudden illness, my confrontation with Clara, the moment the doctors confirmed the poisoning. But it was what she said at the end that stuck with me the most. I defended her for years, she whispered. I ignored the red flags, made excuses. I told myself she was just difficult, not dangerous. Her voice broke slightly, but I was wrong. She turned her gaze toward Clara then, her eyes filled with something raw. She's not the person I thought she was. I swallowed hard, because neither was I. The defense tried to argue that there was no direct proof that Clara had poisoned anyone. They claimed it could have been an accident, that the substance found in the house could have been unrelated. But when they finally called Clara to the stand, she didn't play the victim. She didn't beg for sympathy. She didn't even deny it. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into the faintest hint of a smirk. I did what I had to do. A stunned silence followed. Even her own lawyer stiffened slightly, as if he hadn't been expecting that answer. The prosecutor frowned. And what exactly does that mean? Clara shrugged. You all want to paint me as some kind of monster, but I was just making sure things stayed in balance. My stomach twisted. Balance? The prosecutor echoed. Clara leaned forward slightly. People think relationships are about love. They're not. They're about control. The person who holds the most power wins. Megan let out a soft gasp beside me. And suddenly, I understood. She had never loved me. Not really. Not in the way I had loved her. To Clara, our marriage had never been about partnership or affection. It had been a game, and I had been nothing more than a piece on her board. I clenched my fists, anger simmering beneath my skin. The prosecutor took a slow breath, clearly gathering himself. So you admit to poisoning your husband? Clara's smile widened slightly. If that's what you want to call it. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but I barely heard it. My pulse roared in my ears, a mixture of fury and disbelief washing over me. This was it, her final move. And yet, in her arrogance, she had sealed her own fate. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty. Clara's expression didn't change. Even as the judge delivered the sentence, 25 years without the possibility of parole, she remained eerily composed. But as the bailiffs approached to take her away, she turned her head, her gaze locking onto mine one last time. And in that moment, for the first time since this all began, I saw it. Fear. Not anger. Not arrogance. Not amusement. Fear. Because now, she had lost. I held her gaze, letting her see that I knew. Then I turned away. Megan let out a shaky breath beside me, her hands clasped together. It's over, she whispered. I nodded slowly. Yeah. Clara was gone. And this time, she wasn't coming back. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me, filling my lungs with something that almost felt like relief. For the first time in a long time, I was free, and I intended to live. I walked up the familiar steps of the house that was supposed to be my home, my shoes tapping against the worn wooden boards of the porch. It was a grand Victorian mansion, 80 years old, standing tall in an upscale neighborhood where every lawn was perfectly trimmed and every car in the driveway gleamed under the sun. This place had belonged to my wife's family for generations, passed down like some precious heirloom. When Camilla and I got married, I thought it was ours, a place where we'd build a life together, raise kids maybe, grow old surrounded by those creaky floors and high ceilings. I was wrong about that, and it hit me harder every day. Camilla loved this house more than anything. She grew up here, running through the halls as a kid, picking roses from the garden her father planted before he passed away. She'd tell me stories about those roses, how her dad would spend hours tending to them, how each bloom was a memory she held on to. To her, this house wasn't just a building. It was her family's legacy, and she saw herself as its keeper. I used to think that included me, but lately, I wasn't so sure. 6 months ago, everything changed. Her mother, Helen, and her sister, Clarissa, moved in after Helen sold her own place and Clarissa lost her apartment to some bad money decisions. I didn't fight it. Family's family, right? But ever since they showed up, I'd been feeling less like a husband and more like a tenant, someone who paid the bills but didn't belong. I'm a financial consultant, pulling in a good salary, enough to keep the lights on and the fridge stocked in this big, old house. It's not like I'm struggling. I work long hours, crunch numbers, help people plan their futures. But when I come home, it's like I'm stepping into someone else's world. Helen's got her sharp tongue, always reminding me I didn't grow up with their kind of history. Clarissa treats me like I'm invisible unless she needs something. And Camilla? She just lets it happen, smiling like nothing's wrong while I fade into the background. Tonight was Helen's birthday, and I'd spent the whole day getting ready for it. I stopped by the store after work, picked out a fancy bottle of wine, red, her favorite, and a gift I thought she'd like. A silver bracelet with little charms shaped like roses, a nod to those gardens she always talked about. I even helped set up the dining room, moving chairs, laying out the tablecloth, making sure everything looked perfect. It wasn't easy after a long day, but I wanted to show I cared, that I was part of this family. Camilla had been buzzing around all morning, excited about the party, and I thought maybe tonight would be different. Maybe they'd see me as more than just the guy who signed the checks. I should have known better. As I stood there on the porch, hand on the doorknob, I felt a knot in my stomach. Something was off. I could sense it before I even walked inside. Tonight wasn't going to be about celebration. It was going to be the night I finally saw the truth, the night I'd realized just how little I mattered in this house that was once mine. The air smelled like rain as I pushed the door open, the familiar creak of the hinges greeting me like an old friend. The house was warm, filled with the scent of roasted meat and garlic from the kitchen where Camilla had been cooking. I set the wine and the gift on the hall table, shrugging off my coat. Voices drifted in from the living room, Helen's loud laugh, Clarissa's high-pitched chatter. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and told myself to get through it. I'd done it before, hadn't I? Smiled through the comments, nodded along when they acted like I wasn't there. But tonight felt heavier, like the weight of the last 6 months was pressing down on me all at once. I didn't know what was coming, not yet, but I could feel it building. This house, with its tall windows and polished floors, wasn't mine anymore, if it ever had been. And as I stepped inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to find out just how far they'd go to remind me of that. I stood by Camilla's side as the guests started trickling in, the front doors swinging open every few minutes with a burst of cool evening air. The living room was buzzing with chatter, the clink of glasses, and the faint hum of music Helen had insisted on. Some old jazz record, she said, set the mood. I'd put on a clean shirt and a tie, trying to look the part of the good husband, the guy who belonged here. Camilla was next to me, her arm brushing mine every now and then as she greeted people with that bright smile of hers. She looked beautiful tonight, her hair swept up, wearing a dark green dress that matched the emerald studs in her ears. I wanted to feel close to her, like we were a team hosting this party together, but every time I caught a glimpse of Helen's cold stare or Clarissa's sideways glance, that hope slipped away. They didn't want me here, not really, and it was getting harder to pretend I didn't notice. The guests were mostly Helen's friends from her social clubs, older folks with loud voices and expensive coats, plus a few neighbors who nodded at me politely, but didn't linger. Then there was Clarissa, flitting around like she owned the place, her phone out as she snapped pictures for her so-called influencer career. She'd been living off Camilla's generosity for months. Our generosity, I guess, since I was the one paying off her credit card every time she went overboard on clothes or trips. I didn't mind at first. She's family, and I figured she'd get her act together eventually. But the way she smirked at me tonight, like I was some kind of joke, made my jaw tighten. Helen wasn't much better. She'd been a teacher once, respected and sharp, but now she spent her days sipping tea at fancy clubs and looking at me like I was dirt on her shoe. I wasn't one of them, not born into their world of old money and big houses, and she never let me forget it. Then Philip walked in, Camilla's brother-in-law, married to her cousin who couldn't make it tonight. He was a big-shot entrepreneur, always dressed in crisp suits, his handshake firm and his grin easy. The room lit up when he arrived. Helen rushed over to hug him. Clarissa practically squealed, and even Camilla's face softened in a way it hadn't for me all night. I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching them fawn over him. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. I didn't need their hugs or their praise. But seeing how they welcomed him, how they treated him like he belonged, stung in a way I couldn't shake. He was one of them, part of the family in a way I'd never be. I tried to brush it off, told myself it didn't matter, but deep down, it gnawed at me. I'd been here for years, married to Camilla, living in this house, and I still felt like an outsider. Dinner was about to start, and I followed the crowd into the dining room, the smell of food pulling me along. Camilla had outdone herself, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a salad with little tomatoes she'd grown herself out back. The table was set with the good plates, the ones Helen always said were too nice for everyday use. I was hungry, tired from the day, and ready to sit down and eat, maybe even enjoy myself for a minute. But as we filed in, something shifted in the air. The chatter died down, and I felt eyes on me, not friendly ones. Helen was already seated at the head of the table, sipping her wine, her lips curled in a way that made my stomach twist. Clarissa was whispering something to one of the guests, her giggle sharp and mean. Philip hung back, talking to someone, but even he seemed to sense it. Something was coming. I didn't know what yet, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't just another night of feeling out of place. This was the moment everything changed, the moment they'd pushed me too far. I could feel it in my bones as I stepped closer to the table, my heart thudding louder than the jazz still playing in the background. I walked into the dining room, the smell of roast chicken and warm bread hitting me as I crossed the threshold. The table was set up nice, with candles flickering in the center and the good silverware gleaming under the chandelier. Everyone was moving toward their spots. Helen at the head, Clarissa plopping down next to her, Philip easing into a chair with that easy confidence of his. Camilla was still fussing with a serving dish, her back to me, and the other guests were settling in, their voices low and cheerful. I took a step forward, ready to sit down and eat after a long day, when I noticed something right away. The seats were wrong. I stopped dead, my eyes scanning the table. There were 6 chairs, 6 place settings, 6 little napkins folded just so. But there were 7 of us in the room. My seat was missing. I stood there, frozen, my hands hanging dumbly at my sides as the realization sank in. I counted again, just to be sure, but it was the same, 6 chairs, 7 people. No spot for me. The chatter around the table didn't stop. No one seemed to notice I was still standing. Then Camilla turned around, carrying a bowl of mashed potatoes, and caught my eye. "Oh," she said, her voice light and sweet, like she was surprised. "Isn't there the right number of seats?" She smiled as she said it, but there was something in her eyes, amusement, maybe, or something colder. Before I could answer, a ripple of laughter spread around the table. Helen smirked, her wine glass halfway to her lips, like this was the funniest thing she'd seen all night. Clarissa didn't even try to hide it. She giggled loud and sharp, covering her mouth with her hand like a kid who'd pulled a prank. Even Philip, who I'd thought was decent, let out a quiet chuckle, his head dipping as he tried to play it off. My stomach twisted hard, like someone had punched me. This wasn't an accident. They planned it, set up the table to leave me out, to make me the butt of their little joke. I looked at Camilla again, waiting for her to say something, to fix it, to tell them to knock it off. She was my wife, after all, the woman I'd married, the one I'd stood by through everything. But she just stood there, holding that bowl, her smile not fading. In that moment, I saw her clear as day, not the woman I'd loved, not the one I'd built a life with, but someone else. Someone who'd let this happen, who'd maybe even helped set it up. The laughter kept going, bouncing off the walls, and I felt heat creeping up my neck, my hands clenching into fists. I wasn't hungry anymore. I wasn't tired. I was mad, madder than I'd been in a long time, and something else too. Hurt, maybe, or just fed up. I took a step back from the table, the wood floor creaking under my shoe. The laughter started to die down, like they'd finally noticed I wasn't playing along. I looked at each of them, Helen with her smug grin, Clarissa still smirking, Philip avoiding my eyes now, and Camilla, standing there like nothing was wrong. "I guess I'm not part of the family," I said, my voice low but steady. It wasn't loud, wasn't a yell, but it cut through the room like a knife. No one said anything back. Helen's smirk slipped a little, and Clarissa's eyes widened, but Camilla just stared at me, her smile gone. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked away, my footsteps heavy on the floor, heading for the stairs. The dining room went quiet behind me, the clatter of plates and voices gone. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I'd seen enough, felt enough. This house, these people, they'd made it clear where I stood, and it wasn't with them. As I climbed the stairs, my mind was racing, but one thing was solid. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not tonight, not ever again. The laughter stopped the moment I left the dining room, like someone had flipped a switch and killed the sound. I could feel their eyes on my back as I walked out, but I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see Camilla's face, or Helen's smirk, or Clarissa's stupid giggle frozen in place. My shoes hit the hardwood floor hard as I made my way to the stairs, each step echoing in the big, quiet house. The air felt thick, heavy with the smell of dinner I wouldn't be eating, and my chest was tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. I climbed the stairs slow, one hand on the banister, the wood smooth and cool under my palm. I wasn't shaking, wasn't falling apart, but something was shifting inside me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt clear, like a fog had lifted and I could finally see what was right in front of me. I got to the top of the stairs and headed for our bedroom, the one Camilla and I shared, though it hadn't felt like ours in a long time. The door was half open, and I pushed it wider, stepping inside. The bed was made, the pillows fluffed, everything neat like it always was. Camilla's doing, not mine. I stood there for a second, looking at it all. The dresser with her perfume bottles lined up, the closet stuffed with her clothes, the little nightstand on my side with just a lamp and a book I hadn't finished. This was supposed to be my space too, but it wasn't. Not anymore. Downstairs, they'd made that clear. They expected me to take it, to sit there quietly while they laughed, to swallow the disrespect like I always did. For months, they'd been pushing me out, little by little. Helen with her comments about my job, Clarissa with her endless demands, Camilla with her silence. And now this. No seat at the table, no place for me. They thought I'd just nod and go along, like some obedient dog they could kick whenever they felt like it. They were wrong. I paced the room, my mind spinning but sharp. They didn't know me, not the real me. They saw a guy who paid the bills, who came home tired and kept his mouth shut. They didn't see the part of me that got mad, that fought back when it mattered. I let it slide too long, told myself it was easier to keep the peace, to keep Camilla happy. But tonight wasn't about peace anymore. That missing chair wasn't just a mistake. It was a message, and I'd heard it loud and clear. They wanted me gone, erased from this house, from their perfect little family picture. Fine, if that's how they wanted it. I'd show them I wasn't some pushover they could toss aside. I stopped pacing and grabbed my phone off the nightstand, my thumb hovering over the screen. I needed someone in my corner, someone who'd get it, who'd stand by me no matter what. There was only one person I could call. I scrolled to Adrian's number, my brother, my rock. He was older by 3 years, always the smarter one. The one who had my back when we were kids and Dad was yelling about something dumb. He was an attorney now, a big deal in the city, making more money than I ever would. But he wasn't the type to rub it in. He was solid, loyal. I hit the call button and held the phone to my ear, listening to it ring. Downstairs, I could hear the faint clink of dishes starting up again, like they'd moved on already, like I didn't matter. Hey, Adrian's voice came through, calm and steady, cutting through the noise in my head. What's up? I took a breath, my grip tightening on the phone. I need you here, I said, keeping it simple. Now? It's bad. He didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. On my way, he said, and the line went dead. I set the phone down and looked out the window, the dark garden stretching out below, the roses barely visible in the shadows. Adrian would be here soon, and then we'd see who was laughing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I stood by the bedroom window, staring out at the dark yard, waiting for Adrian to show up. The house was quiet now, the clatter of dishes from downstairs fading into a low murmur of voices. They were probably eating, passing around the food I'd helped pay for, acting like nothing happened. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. I wasn't going back down there, not after what they'd done. The clock on the nightstand said it had been 20 minutes since I called Adrian, and I knew he'd be fast. He lived maybe 15 miles away, in a sleek condo downtown, and he drove like he owned the road. I could almost picture him now, tossing on his jacket, grabbing his keys, his jaw set the way it got when he was ready to handle something big. I needed that tonight, his calm, his strength. My hands were still clenched, my mind racing with everything I'd seen at that table, but knowing he was coming settled me a little. The headlights cut through the dark first, swinging into the driveway with a flash that lit up the rose bushes. I heard the engine cut off, the car door slam, and then the sharp tap of his shoes on the porch steps. Adrian didn't mess around, he never did. I moved to the top of the stairs just as the front door swung open, and there he was, stepping into the foyer like he owned the whole damn house. He was in a tailored suit, dark gray, the kind that said money and power without trying too hard. His hair was neat, his face serious but not worried, like he'd seen worse than whatever I was about to throw at him. He looked up at me, gave a quick nod, and I felt a weight lift off my chest. "Down here," I said, my voice steady now, and he followed me as I headed toward the dining room. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but with Adrian there, I knew I wasn't facing it alone. The dining room went dead silent the second we walked in. Helen was mid-sentence, her fork in the air, some story about her club friends spilling out of her mouth when she saw us and froze. Her eyes narrowed, that smug look she always wore slipping just a bit. Camilla was next to her, a plate of chicken in front of her, and her face went pale, like she'd seen a ghost. Clarissa stopped chewing, her mouth half open, the smirk she'd had earlier gone like it had been wiped off with a rag. Philip glanced up, confused, his eyebrows knitting together, but he didn't say anything. The other guests, Helen's buddies, shifted in their seats, looking between us like they weren't sure what was happening. Adrian didn't sit down, didn't even take off his coat. He just set his briefcase on the edge of the table with a soft thud, the sound cutting through the quiet like a gunshot. Every eye was on him now, and I stood behind him, arms crossed, letting him take the lead. This was his game now, and I trusted him to play it right. He clicked open the briefcase, pulled out a thick file, and dropped it onto the table, the papers fanning out a little. "Evening, everyone," he said, his voice smooth but hard, like steel wrapped in velvet. "Let's talk." Helen opened her mouth, probably to snap something smart, but Adrian held up a hand, and she shut it fast. He had that kind of pull. You didn't argue with him unless you were ready to lose. He flipped open the file, his fingers quick and sure, and pulled out a single sheet. "This," he said, holding it up so they could see, "is why I'm here." I didn't know what it was yet, not the details, but I could tell from the way Camilla's hands gripped the table that it was bad. Adrian's eyes flicked to her, then to Helen, then Clarissa, like he was sizing them up. "You've been busy," he said, and his tone made it clear he wasn't here to play nice. He dropped the bombshell then, calm as you please, like he was reading the weather. "Camilla's selling the house. And she didn't tell you." He looked at me when he said that last part, and my heart stopped for a second. Selling the house. My house. I stared at her, waiting for her to deny it, but she didn't. She just sat there, white as a sheet, and I knew right then Adrian had the truth, and they were screwed. I stood there behind Adrian, my arms still crossed, my eyes locked on Camilla as the words hung in the air. Selling the house. My house. The one I'd poured my life into, the one I thought we'd grow old in. The dining room was so quiet you could hear the candles flickering, the little flames dancing like they were mocking me. Adrian didn't flinch, didn't even look at me again. He just kept going, his voice steady as he flipped open that file and pulled out a contract. "Let's make this quick," he said, holding it up so everyone could see the black ink and official stamps. "This is a sale agreement, signed by Camilla 2 weeks ago. She's been working with a developer to turn this place into luxury condos. Already took a deposit, $500,000, wired straight to her personal account." He slapped the paper down on the table, right in front of Helen, who stared at it like it might bite her. My head was spinning, but I kept my face hard, watching Camilla. She wouldn't look at me. Her eyes were on the table, her hands twisting together in her lap. I wanted her to say something, to tell me it wasn't true, but she didn't. She just sat there, pale and small, like a kid caught stealing. Philip leaned forward, his forehead creased. "What is this?" he asked, his voice sharp, like he couldn't believe it either. Adrian didn't miss a beat. "This," he said, pointing to a highlighted line on the contract, "is evidence of deception. The deal's been in motion for months. Plans approved last month, meetings with the developer, the works. And here's the kicker, it excludes him." He jerked his thumb at me, and I felt my chest tighten. Excludes me. This was my home, my life, and she'd cut me out like I was nothing. Adrian kept going, pulling out more papers, bank records, emails, stuff I didn't even know he had. "The property's in Camilla's name, sure, but under your prenup," he said, looking at me now. "She needs your consent for any major sale." She didn't get it, didn't even ask. He tossed another sheet down, this one showing the deposit, the date stamped clear as day. $500,000 already in her pocket, and the rest, millions more, coming once the deal closes. The plan? Sell the house, cash out, and leave you with nothing. He paused, letting that sink in, then pointed at Clarissa and Helen. Oh, and it gets better. The money's earmarked. Clarissa's getting a chunk to fund her influencer gigs, and Helen's set for a fancy new apartment. All while you're out on the street. I felt my hands drop to my sides, my fists clenching again. They weren't just pushing me out, they were planning to bury me. Philip's face went red, his jaw tight. Camilla, is this true? He asked, but she didn't answer. Helen jumped in instead, her voice sharp. Now wait just a minute. This is family business, not some courtroom drama. Adrian cut her off with a look, cold and hard. Family business? Funny you say that, Helen, because you're in on it too. He slid another paper across the table. Construction plans, blueprints for condos with little balconies and shiny glass windows. These were approved last month. Camilla signed off, and you knew. You've been counting on this payout to keep up your social club life. Helen's mouth opened, then closed, her eyes darting to Camilla like she expected her to fix it. Clarissa just stared at the table, her phone forgotten in her hand, her face blank. I took a step forward, my voice low but shaking. You were going to sell our home? Behind my back? Camilla finally looked up at me, her eyes wide, but she didn't say a word. That silence said everything. She'd done it. All of it. And she'd thought I'd never find out. Adrian tapped the file with his finger. She underestimated you, he said to me, then turned back to them. Big mistake. Because now we've got the proof. Every signature, every transaction. This isn't just betrayal, it's illegal. Prenup violation, fraud, you name it. The room felt like it was shrinking, the air heavy with their panic. Camilla's face drained of color, her hands trembling now. She'd thought she could pull this off, that I'd stay quiet and clueless like always. But she didn't know me, not the me standing here now, with Adrian by my side and the truth laid out like a map. They were caught, and I wasn't letting go. I watched Camilla's face crumble as Adrian laid out the last of the evidence, her hands shaking so bad she had to press them flat against the table. The dining room was a mess of tension, plates of half-eaten food forgotten, wine glasses sitting untouched, the air thick with the smell of chicken and fear. Adrian stood tall, his suit still crisp, flipping through those papers like he was reading a grocery list, not tearing their world apart. Helen tried to pull herself together, her voice cutting through the silence. This is ridiculous, she snapped, pushing her chair back a little, her eyes darting between me and Adrian. You can't just barge in here with some papers and accuse us of whatever this is. She waved her hand at the file, like she could make it disappear. Adrian didn't even blink. I'm not accusing, he said, calm as ever. I'm showing you what's already done. And there's more. He reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a stack of bank statements, dropping them on the table with a soft thud. These are interesting, he said, his tone dry, almost like he was enjoying it. Helen, your social clubs, the dues, the lunches, the trips, all funded by Camilla's secret account, money she siphoned off over the last year. Helen's face went stiff, her mouth opening like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Adrian kept going, pointing at Clarissa next. And you, $100,000 shopping spree last month. New clothes, a trip to Miami, all on a joint savings account you weren't supposed to touch. My brother's money. Clarissa's eyes went wide, her phone slipping from her hand onto the table with a clatter. I didn't. I mean, Camilla said it was fine, she stammered, looking at her sister like she'd save her. Camilla just stared at the floor, her lips pressed tight. I felt my blood boiling, my hands clenched so hard my knuckles ached. Joint savings. That was ours, mine and Camilla's, built up over years of me working late, skipping weekends, saving for a future I thought we'd share. And they'd taken it, spent it like it was nothing, while I was out there busting my ass. Philip slammed his hand on the table, making the plates jump. You used my name for this, he barked, his voice loud enough to shake me out of my haze. He was glaring at Camilla now, his face red. I saw it on those papers, my name as a reference for the developer deal. You dragged me into this mess. Clarissa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Wait, what? She said, like she was just catching up. The room was turning on itself, their perfect little family cracking right down the middle. Adrian didn't let up. He pulled out another sheet, email printouts this time. Here's the proof, he said, sliding them toward Philip. Camilla listed you as a business contact, said you'd vouch for the project. Forged your signature on a letter too. Philip snatched the paper, his eyes scanning it fast, and I saw his jaw tighten. "This is bullshit," he muttered, throwing it down. "I never agreed to this. You lied to me, Camilla. All of you." He looked at Helen and Clarissa too, his disgust plain as day. Helen tried to jump in again. "Philip, darling, it's not what it looks like," but he cut her off. "Don't darling me," he snapped. "You've been playing games with my name, my reputation. I'm done." I took a step closer to the table, my voice low but steady. "You stole from me," I said, looking at Camilla first, then Helen, then Clarissa. "You planned to sell my home, take my money, and leave me with nothing. And you thought I'd just sit here and take it?" Camilla finally looked up, her eyes wet, but I didn't care. She'd lost the right to my sympathy the second she signed that deal. Adrian tapped the bank statements. "It's all here," he said. "Every penny they took, every lie they told. The developer's deposit, the savings account withdrawals, enough to bury them in court if we push it." The guests, Helen's club friends, were whispering now, shifting in their seats, looking anywhere but at us. The whole room was falling apart, their smug little world crashing down around them. Clarissa started crying, big messy sobs, but it didn't move me. Helen's face was red, her hands gripping the table like she could hold herself together. Philip stood up, shoving his chair back. "I'm out," he said, grabbing his coat from the back of the seat. "You're on your own with this." He stormed out, the front door slamming behind him. The sound echoed, and I felt something shift inside me. Relief, maybe, or just the start of something new. They'd built this perfect family on lies, on my back, and now it was done. Adrian looked at me, gave a small nod, and I knew we'd won this round. They weren't just caught, they were finished. I stood there in the dining room, the chaos settling into a heavy quiet after Philip stormed out, the front door's slam still ringing in my ears. Adrian was next to me, closing his briefcase with a sharp click, his face calm like he'd just finished a day at the office. The table was a mess, papers scattered, plates of cold food, wine glasses tipped over from when Clarissa knocked hers in her crying fit. Helen was slumped in her chair, her hands in her lap, staring at the bank statements like they'd burn her if she touched them. Clarissa was sniffling, wiping her nose with a napkin, her mascara streaked down her face. And Camilla, my wife, the woman I'd loved for years, was just sitting there, her head down, her shoulders shaking a little. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. She'd made her choice, and now it was my turn. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the stack of papers I'd grabbed from the bedroom before Adrian got here. Divorce papers, ones I'd had sitting in a drawer for months, just in case. I'd never wanted to use them, never thought it'd come to this, but after tonight, I knew it was over. I stepped forward and slid them across the table toward Camilla, the sound of paper onward loud in the silence. "This is done," I said, my voice steady, almost too calm. She looked up at me, her eyes red, her mouth opening like she wanted to argue. "You wouldn't," she whispered, barely loud enough to hear. I smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was cold, final. "I already did," I said, tapping the papers with my finger. "Sign them. We're finished." Helen jumped up then, her chair scraping hard against the floor. "You can't do this," she yelled, her voice cracking. "This is her house, her family. You don't get to just walk away." Adrian stepped in before I could answer, his tone sharp. "Actually, he can," he said, pulling out another document from his stack. "The prenup's clear. Any major financial move, like selling this place, needs his signature. She broke that. Legally, the house is frozen until this gets sorted out. No sale, no money, nothing." He tossed the paper down, and Helen's face went white. She sat back down hard, like her legs gave out. Clarissa let out a wail, burying her face in her hands. "What am I supposed to do now?" she sobbed, but I didn't care. She'd spent my money like it was hers. She could figure it out. Camilla picked up the divorce papers, her hands trembling as she flipped through them. "Please," she said, her voice small, looking at me like I might change my mind. "We can talk about this." I didn't mean, I cut her off. "You didn't mean to sell our home? To steal from me? To laugh in my face?" I shook my head, stepping back. "You meant every bit of it. You just didn't think I'd fight back." She started crying then, quiet tears rolling down her cheeks, but it didn't touch me. I'd spent years trying to make her happy, trying to fit into this family, and all I got was a missing chair and a knife in my back. I was done begging for a place here. Adrian put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "We've got everything we need," he said low, "just for me. The house is locked down. No one's selling it until the courts figure it out. Their accounts are flagged too. Those secret ones? Gone. They can't touch a dime." I nodded, feeling a strange kind of peace settle over me. Their money, their plans, their whole fancy life. It was falling apart, and I was the one holding the hammer. Helen's club friends were already slipping out, muttering excuses as they grabbed their coats, not wanting to be part of this mess. The room felt smaller now, emptier, like the air had been sucked out with their lies. Camilla's tears didn't stop, but she set the papers down, her hands flat on them, like she could hold on to something. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't want it to be like this." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone I didn't know anymore. "You should have thought of that before," I said, turning away. Adrian picked up his briefcase, gave me a nod, and we walked out together, leaving them there in the wreckage. The front door closed behind us, the night air cool against my face, and I felt lighter than I had in years. Her life was shattered, hers, Helen's, Clarissa's, and there was nothing they could do to fix it. I'd taken back what was mine, and I wasn't looking back. I walked out of that house with Adrian, the night air hitting me like a slap, cool and sharp after the stuffy heat of the dining room. The porch steps creaked under my feet, same as always, but this time it felt different, like I was leaving something behind for good. Adrian's car was still in the driveway, sleek and black, the engine ticking as it cooled off. He didn't say much, just gave me a quick pat on the back and said, "You good?" I nodded, even though I wasn't sure. My chest was tight, my head buzzing with everything that had just happened, but I didn't feel lost. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was moving forward. "Yeah," I said, my voice rough. "Thanks for coming." He grinned, small and quick. "Anytime, man. Let's get you out of here." We climbed into his car, and he pulled out of the driveway, the Victorian mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror as we drove off. Within a month, everything changed, faster than I'd thought possible. Camilla's social life fell apart first. Word got around quick. Those club friends of Helen's weren't shy about talking, and soon the whole neighborhood knew she'd tried to sell the house out from under me. People stopped calling her, stopped inviting her to their fancy dinners and garden parties. She'd always cared about what they thought, always wanted to be the perfect wife with the perfect life, and now that was gone. I heard through a buddy that she'd tried to explain it at some coffee meetup, but no one bought her excuses. She was alone now, stuck in that big house she couldn't sell, her name mud in the circles she'd worked so hard to impress. It didn't make me happy, exactly, but it felt right, like she was finally paying for what she'd done. Helen didn't fare much better. With the secret accounts frozen and the house sale dead, her money dried up fast. She couldn't keep up with her social club dues, couldn't afford the lunches or the trips she loved showing off about. Last I heard, she'd moved into a cramped little apartment on the edge of town, one of those places with thin walls and no view. She'd gone from sipping wine in a mansion to counting pennies in a box, and I didn't feel a bit sorry for her. She'd spent years looking down on me, acting like I wasn't good enough for her precious family, and now she was the one on the outside. It was almost funny how quick her high and mighty act fell apart when the cash ran out. Clarissa hit rock bottom fastest of all. Her influencer gig was toast. Turns out, you can't keep posting selfies and travel pics when your credit cards are maxed and your sister's not bailing you out anymore. She declared bankruptcy a couple weeks after that night, her fancy clothes and trips gone in a flash. Her social media accounts disappeared overnight, deleted, like she couldn't face the shame of it all crumbling. I saw her once, at the grocery store, pushing a cart with cheap store-brand stuff, her hair messy and her eyes down. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word, and I didn't either. She'd lived off my money, laughed in my face, and now she had nothing. That was enough for me. Philip cut ties completely, disgusted by the whole mess. He'd texted me a few days after, apologizing for not seeing it sooner, said he was done with them for good. I didn't blame him. He'd been used too, his name dragged into their scheme. He was a decent guy, just caught up in their web like I'd been. Meanwhile, I was doing better than I'd expected. Adrian and I rented a place together for a while, a clean, modern house a few miles away, with big windows and a yard that didn't need a damn rose garden. I started a business with him, something small, consulting for startups, using my finance skills and his legal brain. It took off quick, and for the first time in years, I felt free. No more walking on eggshells, no more trying to fit into a family that didn't want me. I woke up every day with a clear head, knowing I'd made it out. The divorce went through smooth. Camilla signed the papers after a week of stalling, probably realizing she had no choice. I didn't take much, just my share of what was left after the courts untangled her mess. The house stayed frozen, a big, empty reminder of what they'd lost. I didn't need it anymore. I had a new home, a new life, and it was mine, built from scratch, no strings attached. I could breathe again, laugh again, and it felt good. They tried to break me, but I'd come out stronger, and that was all that mattered. I drove past the old Victorian house a year later, my truck humming along the quiet street as the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and pink. It was a Saturday, and I'd been out picking up supplies for the new office Adrian and I had just leased. Nothing fancy, just a space to keep the business growing. I hadn't planned to come this way, but something pulled me here, some itch to see what was left of the life I'd walked away from. The house came into view around the corner, its tall gables and wraparound porch still standing, but it didn't look the same. The paint was peeling now, flaking off in patches along the siding, and the windows were dark, no lights glowing behind the dusty glass. The rose garden out front, Camilla's pride, her dad's legacy, was a tangle of weeds and thorns, the blooms long gone, choked out by neglect. It wasn't my burden anymore, and seeing it like that felt like closing a book I'd stopped reading a long time ago. I slowed down, pulling to the curb across the street, and just sat there for a minute, engine idling. The neighborhood was still upscale, manicured lawns, shiny cars, but this house stuck out now, a sore thumb in the perfect row. I wondered if Camilla was still inside, rattling around in those big rooms alone. The divorce had finalized months back, and the courts had kept the property locked up, some legal mess about the developer deal she couldn't untangle. Last I'd heard, she was fighting to sell it, but no one wanted to touch it with all the liens and disputes tied to it. She'd lost everything else, her friends, her status, her family's little empire, and now the house was just a shell, a ghost of what it had been when I lived there. I didn't feel bad for her. She'd made her bed, and I wasn't the one lying in it anymore. The street was quiet, just a kid on a bike a few houses down, and the faint hum of a lawnmower somewhere. I leaned back in my seat, hands resting on the wheel, and let my mind drift. A year ago, I'd been standing in that dining room. No seat at the table, no place in their world. I'd felt small then, like I didn't matter, like they could erase me and move on. But they couldn't, not really. I'd walked away, built something new, and left them to pick up the pieces. Adrian and I were doing good. Our business was steady, pulling in clients every week, enough that I'd bought this truck outright, no loan, no debt. I had a place of my own now too, a small house with a porch and a yard, nothing grand, but it was mine. No roses, no history I didn't choose, just a fresh start. I thought about that night, the laughter, the way they'd looked at me like I was nothing. It still stung if I let it, but it didn't control me anymore. I'd taken back what they tried to steal, my pride, my peace, and I didn't need their approval to feel whole. Helen was still in her little apartment, last I checked, scraping by on whatever she could scrape together. Clarissa had moved out of state, chasing some new scheme that had probably flopped like the rest. Philip had stayed gone, true to his word, and I'd seen him once at a coffee shop, where he'd nodded at me like we were old friends. The family they'd built, the one they'd shut me out of, was dust now, scattered by their own greed. I didn't gloat about it, it just was. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching across the street, and I tapped my fingers on the wheel. This house, this relic of a life I'd left, didn't matter anymore. It had been a cage once, a place where I'd tried to fit, tried to belong, but I didn't need it. I didn't need their table, their chairs, their fake smiles. I'd found my own seat somewhere else, one I'd made myself, and it fit me better than anything they could have offered. I put the truck in gear, ready to pull away, and caught my reflection in the side mirror. Older, maybe, but steadier, surer. I smiled, just a little, and it felt real. As I drove off, the house faded behind me, swallowed up by the dusk. I didn't look back, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. That chapter was done, and I had no regrets. The road ahead was open, the air cool through the cracked window, and I turned up the radio, letting the music fill the cab. I was free, and that was enough.